Good morning and welcome to the August 8th Minnehaha County Commission. Just one thing I'd like to do this morning after we have the Pledge of Allegiance, I would like to take a few seconds and just have a moment of silence for Bob Jamison and the public service that he provided to all of us, and in some cases was a mentor and leader in the things that he did. So we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. Again, good morning and welcome. I'd like to remind people to silence their cell phones if they will, please. And also the meeting documents for today's discussion are next to Commissioner Bender on the end of the table there. And lastly, if you need a listening device, if you'd contact staff up front, they would be able to help you with that. With that, we'll jump into routine business. The first item is to consider a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. Item 2 is to approve the commission minutes from August 1st.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. And the second item is to approve the minutes of the joint Del Rapids and County Commission meeting on August 1st.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve those minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. Item 3 are bills to be paid of $514,444.06.
Pay the bills.
Second.
Motion and a second. Commissioner Heiberger.
Just a comment, there was still, I know it's still a work in progress, but there were 2 valuations through the court systems. One was for $3,500 and one was for, well, they actually both were for $3,500. And so just continue to have a work in progress on that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would just comment that in our highway department, we spent $97,000 on one project and $60,000 on another, which brings our total for the bills down quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we have a motion and a second to approve the bills. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion unanimously passes. We filed reports, and those are the county sheriff's report for July and the highway construction project for August. Action item 5 is to consider a motion to approve the routine personnel action. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there a motion, a second?
Second.
I can't do 2 things at once. We have a motion and a second to approve routine personnel action. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion unanimously passes. Item 6 are applications for abatement. Olivia, please.
So we have 4. So we have Cheryl Engel, RDID 10860 for 2016 property taxes in the amount of $712.16. Then we have 2 for Alpha Center. First is RDID 59703 in the amount of $5,454.11, and the second is RDID 59704 in the amount of $168.75, both for 2016 property taxes. And then we have Ross Wickham, RDID 75112 for 2016 property taxes in the amount of $868.87.
Thank you, Olivia. Does anyone have any questions on any of those abatements? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve items A, B, C, and D.
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second to approve those items. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. We also have item E, which is a recommendation for denial. Diane?
Good morning, Diane Redkema, Equalization Office. Brad Bergman, ID 87317, for a tax amount of $1,061.57. I'm recommending to deny this. This is for an owner occupied. I believe Mr. Bergman is here if he'd like to speak.
Is Mr. Bergman here this morning? Mr. Bergman,
Not here.
gone. I'm sorry. Other comments, Diane?
No, like I said, this is just, I'm recommending to deny it because he never filled out an application.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Diane? If not, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to deny that application for abatement.
Is there a second?
I'll
Yeah.
second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any other conversation? We have a recommendation for denial. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. There's no notices and requests, no planning and zoning notices. Item 9 is a petition for compromise, and the first one is item A, DPN 093366 for $244.40. Good morning, Belinda.
Good morning, Melinda Storley, Commission Assistant. Before you is DPNO 93366 in the amount of $244.40. The applicant initiated an IVC for her son. Apparently, there was some miscommunication regarding the timeline for service. There was a deadline of 5 days. The petition expired, and they had to withdraw the IVC. So she's requesting to have the compromise of lien.
Mr. Chairman, I've long been concerned about people who do IVCs on their family and get the bill. As you know, if my wife did it to me, she would get the bill, but if I did it to you, I would not get a bill. In any case, I would make a motion to compromise this lien for zero payment.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any comments? The item A, DPN 093366 has been recommended for a compromise of zero payment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. Item B is DPN 04758 for $10,003.64.
In this case, the petitioner has been divorced from her ex-spouse for over 20 years. She is currently married and has been married for, again, a long period of time. They're in the process of relocating to Florida and would like to close on their home. They recently found this lien, even though they have purchased a home in the past. They have purchased 2 previous homes. She is offering to pay her portion of the lien for the period she was married to her ex-spouse, with the exception of a medical bill that belongs to him. And then she is offering to only pay 50% of her share of those expenses, which brings us down to $2,246.71. She's requesting that her name be removed from the joint lien with that payment, leaving the remainder of the lien in the petitioner's ex-spouse name.
Does anyone have any questions for Melinda about the DPNO?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do we know why they were able to do these other real estate transactions without this lien being discovered?
Melinda, do you
No,
have
I
any-
don't. Those happened a long time ago, and they've been in their current house for a while. I would have to track a realtor and find out. I don't have that information.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Karski.
And also the bankruptcy, there's been a bankruptcy too, I believe, correct?
There has been, if I may. Mr.
Absolutely.
Chairman. There were several bankruptcies, but the county liens were recorded before the bankruptcies, and bankruptcies do not clear county liens.
County liens, okay.
So it is different than the one that we dealt with a few weeks ago.
Yes.
Any other questions about the
Mr. Chairman,
DPNO?
I'll make a motion to accept her offer and of 224671, remove her name and leave it on her ex-husband. One in the hand is two in the bush.
I would second that. I'm just wondering if that person is here.
Yes. Is the petitioner here this morning? If you are, you do not have to get up or identify yourself. You only need to make comments from where you're seated. I don't know the person. Not here?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Again, we have a motion to settle the DPNO for $2,246.71 to the petitioner and the remaining balance to go to her former husband, correct?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Now we're to the regular business, or to the opportunity for comment, I'm sorry. If anyone has any comments that they'd like to make this morning that are not on the regular business agenda, we would like to hear from you. Anyone have any comments? If not, we will move to the regular business agenda. This morning, we have a public hearing and a second reading to consider a request to rezone 17-03 from A1 Ag District to I1 Light Industrial District to the property legally described as printed for future development. Scott Anderson.
Yes, thank you. Scott Anderson, Planning Director. Today is a public hearing, possible final adoption of a rezoning request, 1703. This is to rezone approximately 4 acres from A1 Agriculture to I1 Light Industrial. The property is located at the south end of Cottonwood Avenue at the Crooks exit, and this has gone before the Planning Commission. It was held a hearing at the Planning Commission on June 26th. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to rezone this property to I1 Light Industrial. The hearing has been noticed in the paper. I've provided you some information, the minutes from the Planning Commission, and I'll go over a couple of items with you here. This is the location. You can see the Crooks exit on Interstate 29. The 4 acres is shown in the red area, and it's at the south end of Cottonwood Avenue, more or less. This is a blow-up of the property. You can see the purple shaded area to the north is the location of Hyman Fire Truck or Hyman Fire Apparatus. That property is already zoned I1 Light Industrial, so this is just an expansion of that existing zoning district. The applicant has plans to develop this in the future, imminent plans, so they're requesting the rezoning. And right now, it's a farm field. It's basically vacant property or being tilled into agricultural, but and this is basically the property that's to the north of them.
Thank you,
This is looking to
Scott.
the west. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer it. This is a public hearing, and I will put it back on the map for the that shows the parcel, basically.
Does anyone have any questions at this point for Scott? I'm sorry, but if there's comments, you do need to come to the microphone and identify yourself.
Not what I showed up for, but I have history in this. My name is Carla Kemp. I'm currently a resident of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. My question is, for this future, clearly the purpose of this is to expand. And my question is, what kind of facilities are intended to be placed on this site? Do we already have plans for that? Or is this just potential for future?
We didn't catch your address, I'm sorry.
4 South Olive Drive, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 57103.
Thank you. Got that? Scott, could you answer her question, please?
They have indicated that they will be constructing a commercial activity on the property.
All right, let me be more specific. Is this going to involve heavy metals, any type of chemical, petrochemical, anything that might have any type of toxic influence, anything that also involves petrochemicals, things that have to do with runoff that might go into surrounding fields, influence surrounding businesses that are active out there.
Could you expand, please?
Well, it's my understanding that it's going to be the location for a women's clothing warehouse. So women's clothing and primarily is going to be stored in there, so.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Is the applicant here this morning? Would you like to make any comments? And you also will have to do the same and come to the microphone and tell us your address.
That's Antonin, 3124 West Auburn Hills Court, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. As Scott just said, it's going to be a women's clothing warehouse. It's a pack and ship business, so online sales for the most part, where they bring in stuff and send it back out.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Because this is a public hearing, we will take any comments that are in favor of or opposed to this process or this application. Anybody opposed to the application? With that, commission action.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the request to rezone. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion unanimously passes. Thank you for coming. Item 11 is a public hearing and a second reading to consider proposed zoning ordinance amendments to the ordinance MC 16-150-17 regarding CAFO and aquaculture regulations. Scott Anderson and Kevin Hookman.
Today is a public hearing, once again, for an ordinance amendment. I would want to give you, first of all, a little bit of a background on the history of the workings that we've done, the project, and to give you an idea of the attempt that we've made for public outreach. The overall process to look at amending our ordinance that deals with confined animal feeding operations and other small sections of the zoning ordinance actually started about a year ago. The planning staff met with, at our July 25th, so more than a year ago, we met with the Planning Commission and we had a discussion on the need and whether there was a need to amend our zoning ordinance for concentrated animal feeding operations. The last major amendment occurred in 1998, and we were aware that there were several areas of our ordinance that were no longer really reflecting the typical business practices that were occurring with confined animal feeding operations. So we had a discussion at that meeting, and the Planning Commission directed staff to start researching, preparing some information that could be presented to the Planning Commission for their review, and that started the process. Then we had the discussion of the CAFO or potential ordinance amendment for confined animal feeding operations. Once again, at the October 24th meeting, we had a long discussion with the Planning Commission. It was on the agenda again at the November 28th meeting last year on the Planning Commission. We have no meeting in December, so there was no activity in December or January. But then once again, we had a meeting upon which we presented a final proposed draft at the February 27th meeting of the Planning Commission. And that was actually the 8 to 10 pages of text and the wording, and that really was the draft of the ordinance. At that time, Planning Commission reviewed it. There were some additional changes they wanted to see, and they asked us to bring that back, and we brought back the updated draft on March 27th. And again, there was some more suggestions, and finally at the April 24th meeting, that was the final meeting before they set the hearing date. So at the April 24th meeting, the Planning Commission felt They had a document that was well enough crafted. We had done extensive research, looking at other communities, looking at the odor footprint model that the state uses and other information. We gathered that all together. We presented it to the Planning Commission. They felt that we had a document that was ready for public hearing. So we made the final presentation May 22nd, and they authorized staff to publish a hearing notice for a public hearing at our June 26th Planning Commission meeting. We published the hearing notice, and we had our formal hearing at the Planning Commission on June 26th. And at that meeting, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the proposed ordinance amendment to be brought forth to you. So that's what has led up to this information. We've been working on this for over a year. We've sent out notices to all the townships, supervisors. That was approximately 60 letters. We've reached out to the public media outlets, sent out hearing notices. We've put it on our website. So with that, the next step is today's actual public hearing. And Kevin Hookman from my office has prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which he will present, that will go over in detail the changes and what is being recommended by the Planning Commission for your consideration today. And then afterwards, we'll both be available for questions. And I'll remind you, it's a public hearing, so we will need to ask if there's public input.
Thank you. Morning, Kevin.
Morning. I'm Kevin Hookman, County Planning Department. Yes, I prepared this PowerPoint for today's meeting, which is a general overview of the changes and amendments that are being proposed in the ordinance, and then I have a few maps at the end of the PowerPoint to present as well. So I'm going to present this in kind of both towards with the section of the ordinance and kind of topical. So this is the changes pertaining to the agricultural zoning district section of the ordinance. Items that are going to be changed for Class D operations include a separation for new CAFOs from existing CAFOs, which weren't typically there or weren't there before, and a 50-foot property line setback, where previously they could go much closer to the property line, up to 7 feet with a CAFO. And then all CAFOs will require a zoning permit to show that if anybody has a new CAFO to put to place, that they meet the requirements. And a zoning permit is through the office. It is not a public hearing. It just shows that they meet the requirements and they can get a permit. Then the items for change for existing CAFOs. Currently, existing CAFOs have the ability to expand without a public hearing. And this would also kind of amend some of those sections. And one of it was regarding manure application to refer to the CAFO regulations instead of having it right in the agricultural district. And then it removes the expansion of the 500 animal unit limit, in part because it's been difficult to determine how many animals are on a site between 98 and today, because that becomes a long time ago. Existing CAFOs are defined as something that was existing prior to a specific date in 1998, I believe in May. Then also from the existing CAFOs, they will also require a zoning permit to expand. Let's see. This portion of here that I have is showing some of the changes that are made to the CAFO regulations section of the ordinance and the additional use regulations. These are some things that have been removed or greatly altered. As you can see here, the boring tests have been removed from the CAFO ordinance and is being replaced by the requirement that if it's located over a mapped aquifer, it's going to have to get a state permit, in which the state will require those boring tests. So somebody will still be reviewing the groundwater based on the boring and if it has an aquifer present or not. And the pest control plan and the odor control plan were removed from the ordinance. This has been done because of difficulties for staff to review plans to see if they're going to be adequate to do. Also, many of the concerns for odor have been addressed by, say, requiring trees for setbacks if they're going to be reducing setbacks. Also, part of the problem is understanding just because there's a plan for pest control, say cats. Having barn cats as a pest control plan doesn't mean it's going to be an effective pest control plan, but it still would meet our ordinance. Pests are a problem for the producer as well, so it's in the producer's best interest to keep rodents and keep flies away from their animals as well. Some more items that have been largely removed. The nutrient management plan section was largely removed and replaced. Removal is done because the DENR requires nutrient management plan for CAFOs that are required the general permit. This is anything over 1,000 animal units. Then they will have the capability to review it accurately and with the engineers and the people to do that. Is also replaced with a manure management plan, which will still require to know how the manure is going to be handled, whether it's liquid or if it's dry, where it's going to be placed, how is it going to be placed, are you planning to put it on, inject it, or if it's going to be surface applied for solid manure, that sort of thing. So still planning related manure issues are going to be part of the ordinance. The allowance for surface application for liquid manure, that has been removed out of our ordinance because previously that was something that the planning director could allow. Now it is up to the producer to obtain state approval for land application without injecting it. And that can happen in cases where a producer is going to apply liquid manure, say, on an alfalfa field that does not get tilled up. So they can apply it onto that if it's part of their nutrient management plan. Some amendments to the ordinance in the CAFO section. The flow of the ordinance was largely changed to better show where things are needed for the application process, whether it's before the application is presented to the staff or if it's after the permit is approved. Now it's better categorized in that order. The setbacks for potential waivers have been changed or amended using odor setbacks that are provided by the state or by SDSU. There's a tool that is out there, and looking at that and reviewing the odor setbacks, it's been amended to more closely resemble that. And I have some maps and materials later on in the PowerPoint to show that better. The ordinance maintains land use setbacks, as I just described, and maintains a reduction if somebody lives within those setbacks. The reductions are allowed if a waiver is signed by a neighbor that is living within that setback. If a neighbor that's living in that setback does not sign a waiver, the setbacks can be reduced up to 50% based on professional drawn and planned shelter belt to help block the smell from disperse odors and block some of the smell and the scenes of the proposed CAFO. Previously, the reduction in setback was unlimited. You can reduce it right up to the front door of the house. You can also, and based on management of the CAFO or other practices that the CAFO might have. So this will provide a more solid line of that 50% setback. Other minor changes were made to the setback requirements for environmental applications of manure, but none of the distances were changed. It's just kind of the wording of that has changed. The notification requirements were removed from the ordinance and the CAFO section of the ordinance and moved to the conditional use permit section of the ordinance. It has also been changed that the half-mile notification is now up to the producer to send, and the producer will have to send certified mail to show that they did indeed send those letters for the half-mile setback. new portions of the ordinance. A description of when a state general permit is required. A state general permit is for water pollution control, and now it is part of our ordinance of if you are over 1,000 animal units, if you're over an aquifer, and that sort of situations of when a state general permit is required as part of the application. Requirements for construction documents. The construction of a new barn or a new animal waste control structure would have to be engineered and stamped so that they meet the engineer's capabilities for either lining for a manure management structure or to make sure that snow load is going to be capable for a large structure for, say, housing pigs, that those spans get very large for snow load so they don't crush the animals eventually if there's too much snow, or reduce that. And then the clarification for manure application requirements. Before there wasn't, the manure application section was a little unclear. Now it says that how non-liquid manure can be applied and where it can be applied. It also includes dry manure as well in the ordinance. Other changes in the ordinance pertaining to CAFOs. As I said, that the half-mile setback has been moved to the conditional use permit application portion. In the conditional use permit application portion of the ordinance, we've also changed or proposed to change the expiration for a conditional use permit from 1 year to 2 years. This is primarily because many conditional use permit applications, not only CAFOs but others, the permit is the first stop. Then they have to further get state approval or engineering or other documents before they can even build. And it's oftentimes that 1 year is not enough time to get all of those other documents in line before they can start construction. Definitions were changed accordingly. So if there were new terms used in the ordinance, or other terms changed, so the definitions match up with the new ordinance. And then we have added aquaculture. So this is the topical thing. Aquaculture was added to the agricultural zoning district. If it's a small aquaculture facility, they can do it as a permitted special use. If it's a large one, they would have to get a conditional use permit. The definitions between small and large have been based on the EPA's definition and the DENR's and when they become regulating these aquacultures or these fish farms. Aquaculture was also added to the I-1 light industrial zoning district and the I-2 general industrial zoning district, as many of these aquaculture facilities now that we've heard or read about in the Midwest are housed in warehouses. So it's likely that these aquaculture facilities would be big tanks and big buildings in the industrial zoning districts, so we wanted to keep that option open. So the amendments to the setbacks, this would be the new setback chart. It keeps the kind of same flow. The previous ordinance had increasing setbacks as the CAFO got larger. So above 2,000 animal units, every 250 animal units would continue to grow larger and larger and larger. This proposal would cap it to the 3/4 of a mile setback for dwelling, 1 mile setback for public parks and schools, and then it changes the setbacks for cities based on the size of the city. The reason why the cities have different setbacks and based on the size of the city is as they grow, we want to help kind of plan that the producer doesn't get real close to the city and have to deal with the city sooner than later. We'd like that to be further out into the future for when a city setback would be. Some maps. So staff created some maps to show the proposed setbacks as they relate to the odor footprint model that is done through SDSU. Those lines represent the percentage of nuisance that when the odor would be considered a nuisance. The red line, which is the farthest out line, is the 99% odor-free or nuisance-free odor. The way I understood that is if it's considered a nuisance if the smell is strong enough to change your plans outside. So if you're gonna have a backyard barbecue and you go out and you say, oh, I can't handle this, and you go back inside, but you may smell it, but you can say, I can handle this. So then you continue on. So it's not gonna say that you'll never smell it, but it'll say that it won't be a nuisance. You'll see here, this is a Class C beef CAFO, which has the proposed setback of 1,320 feet, which is a quarter mile. And you'll see this is a recently approved facility. The orange line that is just on the inside of that black line represents the proposed setback. The orange line represents the 98% odor-free line. And 98% odor-free, from that would say approximately 15 hours a month that would be a nuisance odor for the people who would be in that circle. Oops. This is a recently approved swine operation. You can see the black line again. The swine has a different odor footprint. So you can see that the odor footprint is a little larger, but it rings around approximately the 96% odor-free ring in that location. And that would be approximately 29 hours a month of nuisance odor for anybody within that ring. This is a little bit of an older approved dairy operation. It's a Class C. Again, you have the quarter mile setback. And again, the footprint for a dairy is different than other feeding operations. In this operation, the quarter mile setback roughly aligns with the 91% odor free. And that would be approximately 64 hours of odor in a month. And then to show one of our largest CAFOs in the county, approved CAFOs, this would be a setback of 3/4 of a mile, 3,960 feet. And that rings approximately around the 96% odor free. When you add, then the next few maps are some demonstrations of where CAFOs would be able to fit in the county. Anywhere you see white on these maps would be potential location sites for these size CAFOs. For a Class D CAFO, you'll see that there's a lot of spaces. Each one of those green dots is a residence. The gray area are setbacks from, say, schools or rivers and cities. So that's going to be the approximate areas where you can place Class D CAFO. There's still quite a bit of space for that. You'll also see that Class C CAFOs, that it grows quite a bit, so there's a lot less white space on the map, but there are still some locations that are possible. You can also consider, say, any green dot that is sitting alone may be a potential CAFO site, as that may be a farmer who wants to grow animal agriculture at some point. And then this would be Class B, and that's the 1,980 feet. You see that it's quite a bit less white space. And both Class C and Class B CAFOs would require a conditional use permit to be approved. And then Class A, even with the proposed CAFO locations, it becomes the producer is going to have to work with their neighbors in order to have a Class A operation. They would have to still come in and obtain a conditional use permit, and there would still be a public hearing for any CAFO of a Class A size. So though the setbacks for a Class A, for example, have been reduced, it's not necessarily going to be easier to obtain the permit just because of the reduction. They'll still have to go through the same process, and they'll have to meet the requirements. So, with that, is there any questions that I can answer from that?
Does anyone have any questions for Kevin at this point? Commissioner Barth?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank Kevin for this very flowing description of things. And being on the Planning Commission, the only commissioner on the county commission on that board, we talked about this, as Scott pointed out, a year ago. And one of the things about what we're doing today is we want to make any changes that we choose to make without the pressure of having an impending investment being proposed by somebody. No one has come to us and said they want to build a $100 million, aquaculture facility. Although if they did, I'd talk to them. So the fact is, we're able to deliberate without that kind of pressure and without appearing to jump when someone says jump. And so today I'm hoping that we have a good discussion, and certainly some setbacks are increased, some are reduced. We made these adjustments based on science and research, and notice is still going to be required. And again, like with the pest control, we did actually have a cattle operator suggest that he could keep rats under control with cats, and as opposed to the logical thing, a 12-year-old with a 22. In any case, that's where we're at, and that's why we're here today. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Bender, I believe.
I'm curious, you spent quite a bit of time talking about how the setbacks relate to the annoyance-free zones, and I'm curious, was there a target that your department was trying to reach? Did you consider, since the different types of operators have different patterns, whether there was an opportunity to adjust the requirements based on the type of producer?
So I'll just bring it back to here. As I noted before, you'll see that the setbacks change per type of animal for the nuisance odor. What I have received from SDSU and some of the other, they gave me a chart from, I think it was Purdue, that showed that for agricultural, where there's few residents or rural residential areas, setbacks should shoot for somewhere between 91 and 94%. I was hoping to not get any less than that, or we were hoping as a staff to not get any less than that. And even though, say, this Class C dairy is really kind of pushing that boundary for this particular setback, it is not going to be any less than that 91%. Then when you get into the very large, this particular dairy is over 5,000 animal units, and the setback is still within that realm of percentile based on the recommendation from the odor footprint tools. There are ways that you can manipulate the tool for management practices. Say if a producer was to have a biofilter, if they have a completely confined building, they can use a biofilter to reduce odor. And at issue with that is, then that's one specific type of building. And the ordinance just becomes very large when you start to regulate very individual types of buildings. We can consider those types of options during the conditional use permit process if there are, say, neighbor concerns of odor, we can still require, say, a biofilter if that's a type of facility that they could maintain, or we could require if it's a pit, a liquid manure pit, we could require maybe some sort of a straw cover or some sort of cover on that pit to help reduce odors. So that is all part of a consideration, but we didn't want to have that as part of the ordinance specifically for the length of the ordinance and enforceability.
Commissioner Karski?
If I could, just for those of us that maybe aren't wonks on zoning, can you break down A, B, C, D total animal units and how that relates to each type of animals? Just so point of reference for everybody so that we can be able to.
All right. So the Class D, which is the smallest operation, I'll even bring it up the map here. A Class D operation is an animal units between 50 animal units and 249 animal units. A Class C is animal units between 250 to 999. Class B is 1,000 to 1,999. And then Class A is anything above 2,000.
Yeah, break it down, beef cattle, dairy cattle, and maybe chickens too. How many animals per animal unit?
Sure.
How that breaks out.
All right. So the animal units are defined in the ordinance, and they have been amended a little bit based on to align our ordinance better with the state ordinance. So the animal units are based on a feeder or a slaughter cow that is worth 1 animal unit, and everything else is based on that. So it's a manure or the mature dairy cattle has a larger animal unit output because they have a larger output or waste output, manure output. And so their value is 1.4 animal units. Then you go down to swine. There are several categories of swine. Finisher swine, which is a fairly common type of facility, is 0.4 animal units per swine. Then you have nursery, that's a swine of 55 pounds or more. Then a nursery swine is a swine less than 55 pounds, and that is 0.1 animal units. A farrow to finish operation, so that would cover kind of the whole process of farrowing the piglets and bringing them to finish. You count the sows and you multiply the sows by 3.74. Then you have a swine production unit, so this would be where sows and then the piglets are. That'd be 0.47. Horses are 2 animal units. Sheep are 0.1 animal units. Turkeys are 0.018 animal units. Laying hens and boilers that are liquid manure handling system are 0.33 animal units. Chickens that the other than liquid manure handling is 0.008. And then laying hens with liquid manure is 0.012. Ducks with a liquid is manure handling system is 0.2, and then ducks with other than liquid is 0.033. Okay. So when you get into the chickens and the ducks, it'll be dozens of animals before you get to an animal unit.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Heiberger?
Just a comment, and that was that the numbers that Kevin just read off, for anyone who wants to look at, those are already in our ordinances, and it's under section 6, and I'm sure the Planning Commission can show you where those charts are at. That's all listed on some of the paper that's going to be in Jean's book, but that stuff's been in there forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing we're changing. That's just the way it is.
Other questions? If not, this is a public hearing, and we'd like to keep this as organized as possible. So we'd like to limit presentations to about 5 minutes each, and we'll start with the proponents, and then we'll go to the opponents, and then we may come back for questions. Again, we'd try to limit it to about 5 minutes. We'd try to eliminate, if you will, any duplications of presentations. I know some of you think we're really slow learners, but we do catch on relatively quick. We've had this information for a couple of weeks to review, and we do have all of it in writing in front of us, and we'd be happy to share more of that with you. But we really want to make sure that it does stay organized. One of the things that Bob Jameson told me one time a long time ago that I still remember is he said when people give presentations, they ought to keep in mind the fact that if they have their kids with them, when they walk out of the building, they still have kids who like them. And I think that that's something that we all should play in perspective, because frankly, this is about getting opinions, and we do want to hear those, but we want to keep it professional. So with that, we'll start with the proponents, and you do need to identify yourself, and thank you for coming.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Walt Bones. My address is 46036 268th Street in Chancellor. On that last map, I'm clear down at the corner. I walk across the road to get my mail. I'm in Turner County, so I am a Minnehaha County resident. I do appreciate the process. I had the distinct honor and pleasure to serve on the Minnehaha County Planning and Zoning Board for 10 years. It was a number of years back. Mike, I don't know how long ago was it that Mike was here, but anyway. And so got some pretty good training and understand the process. So to Commissioner Karski's, you're as far as being the zoning wonk, I have a couple letters to the editor. Turner County is going through the same type of thing right now. And so trying to update and renew some of our things. And so if your staff wants to pass these out, I have some extra copies here that I just tried to educate the public as to the process. And so the public hearing process is part of that, but there's a lot of work that goes on, as Commissioner Bartha understands. Being on that zoning board, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes before it gets here, and I thought the staff did a really nice job of talking that. To the particular ordinance, about 7 or 8 years ago, the NRCS, the National Conservation Resource Service, which is part of the United States Department of Agriculture, did a study, and they noticed in the previous 25 years before that, 46 million acres of productive ground, farm ground, pasture ground, had been taken out of production due to development, commercial development, industrial, residential, and recreational development. 46 million acres. Of that, 17 million acres was identified as prime farm ground. Just to give you a little rule of thumb, if you do the math, 25 years is about 17 million minutes. And so in the previous 25 years, we've had 1 acre of highly productive farm ground that has been taken out of production every minute. So as we try to continue our quest to feed a world population, times are changing, as we obviously understand that. Some of that productive farm ground is getting less and less and less. And so that's point number one that I'd like to make. Point number two, I had a chance to work at the fair last night, Simpar Fair and the Pipestone Vet Systems Discovery Center. Great facility if you haven't had a chance to get there. I was working with a young man by the name of Kirby Krogstad. His dad milks cows just north of town here. He's a senior at South Dakota State University, will graduate this spring. Not sure what he's going to do yet. He'd like to come back to the farm, but doesn't know if there's, sometimes in farm family transitions that we have here, either one of the farming members has to maybe retire to make room for the next generation, or the farm needs to figure out a way of creating more income. And if that's getting bigger, if that's expanding, and probably the easiest way of doing that is expanding their animal units and their animal operation. It's a whole lot cheaper doing that than going out and buying a bunch of farm ground and buying more equipment. So I appreciate what the staff and the zoning board has done. And I would urge your support to that, because I think that is, as agriculture is changing, I think we also need to modernize, some of our zoning regulations, and I really think they've taken a positive step forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Walt. Any questions for Mr. Bones? Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I forgot to ask at the very beginning, and I apologize for that, if you'd raise your hands and tell me how many people expect to speak as proponents besides, okay, thank you. And for those who would like to speak as opponents, how many people would speak? Pretty even, that's good. Okay, thank you.
I'm Mike Cipher, 26443 461st Avenue at Hartford. I'm, of course, on the Planning Commission currently. And Walter, it's been 20 years since you've been on the Planning Commission, just so you know. I replaced Walter on the Planning Commission. But no, I think over the last 8 months as we've worked on this, there's several things that my number one concern is always that you protect the existing producers. Because in today's economics, it's just, you evidently, sooner or later, you're going to have to grow just to keep up. As returns are diminished, that's just the world we live in, and I think the staff did a good job of including that, and I have to commend Kevin for not rolling his eyes every time we'd come back in those 8 months period. We'd say, go check this, this, and this, because we think it should be different. And he did a very good job with that. So as I look at our process that we went through, and I think this map that's on the board right now probably speaks volumes as far as people who are concerned about very large agricultural facilities, you're going to have to work with your neighbors or it's just not going to happen in this county. And the other thing that we have is limitations that people don't always consider is things as simple as water. If you're up there in Buffalo Township, Clear Lake, there's some concerns that you just won't have the water. That's the dead end of Minnehaha County rural water, and those things just aren't going to happen that easy. And so as I looked at our ordinance and the review that we did, I was glad we put the onus on the producer to notify the neighbors, because that was not in there before. It was up to the Planning Commission or the county office to do that. I think it's really important that as a part of any expansion, any livestock facility, that the neighbors should be notified by the person doing it and not an office in Sioux Falls. And I think that's a very important part of this change of the ordinance. So with that, I would encourage the commission to approve the ordinance as with the changes that we have put forth. And with that, like I say, I appreciate your time. And with somebody else, I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone have any questions of Mike at this point? Next individual, please.
Bob Colby. I have had the privilege and honor of being on the County Planning Commission for a good number of years, and like Walt, we're a little bit in the past, but I will make one observation. The maps that are being presented today are far more restrictive than they were when I sat on the County Commission. I call myself a farmer in spite of the fact that I inherited land. That doesn't make me a farmer, but I was either smart enough or dumb enough to go on out and buy some more. And I figure if you buy it, you become a farmer. While I was on the county commission, the largest single crop in the United States became lawn grass. So we are restricting the area that we can farm as the cities grow. And in South Dakota, the metropolitan areas, and I'm using that term loosely, the areas are in the J from Watertown down to Elk Point and then over to Yankton. The best agricultural land in South Dakota is in that J, and we're covering it with houses. And so that makes a more restrictive progress or process for farming. When sitting on the county commission, we wanted to have good information. And there was an editorial that said that we should be careful because we might contaminate the Ogallala aquifer. That's not good information because I think that Scott would say, I don't think we come even close to the Ogallala aquifer. That's western South Dakota. If you get good information, make sure that it's good information because there's a lot of spurious arguments that come out and about. I think that the county commission should have, every one of you, have some experience on the planning and zoning board. We made the mistake in the past where one person sat there for a long time, that happened to be me, and the other commissioners slowly were contramanding even our own ordinances. But, be that as it is, you have to consider the rights of the person who owns the farmland and is trying to make a living as opposed to the people who don't have the land and they want to have all the amenities of the city. You know, they want the open views, they don't want the dust, the dirt, the smell, and everything else. Agricultural activity creates problems for people who aren't part of agriculture. So I would just say, I don't have a dog in this fight, but this has been a dynamic system in Minnehaha County. We were called the most ag-friendly county in South Dakota, and I think that should be. But there are still restrictions necessary in order to deal with some of the growth processes. I've got this stuff I can't get rid of. Anyhow, as Walt Bones pointed out, we are restricting and reducing the amount of ag land, but we still want good, cheap food. Would you sooner have cattle and hogs raised in South Dakota, or would you like to have cattle and hogs raised in China, Southeast Asia, or even in South America, where they may not have the same kind of restrictions on agriculture that we have here? I'm not trying to be a proponent, I'm not trying to be an opponent, I'm just saying be good stewards of the ag land that we have in Minnehaha County and use good information. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any questions for Bob?
I will leave because I have money in the meter and I don't want to contribute to Sioux Falls betterment.
I will tell you that, just for your own information, that all of us do rotate between committee assignments, and I think 3 of the 5 of us for sure have been on the planning and zoning, and the 2 that maybe haven't will get that opportunity. So we do rotate between how many boards we have, but there are a ton. Excuse me, please.
Good morning. My name is Becky Randall. I live at 48031 248th Street, Del Rapids, South Dakota. I also serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I am a farmer. And I would like to speak on behalf of the proposed changes. I think that Kevin and all of our staff have just done a wonderful job. Like they said, we sent it back to them several times, and they were very patient about revisions until we felt we had the document right. One of the things that I really want to speak positively about is the manure management plans that are now being regulated through the state and through approval from a certified crop consultant who is familiar with manure management plans. I think that is not an expertise of our staff, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but I think that this is a good thing because there are, for anyone very familiar with CAFOs, the rules are very, very rigorous from the state. You must maintain and adhere to strict guidelines. There are strict rules about the number of acres that you must have under contract where you can haul manure. And so they do a very good job of regulating that manure management. So I want to commend the planning and zoning staff for having that go through the state and be very specific about those state manure management plans. So I think that was the big thing I wanted to address, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have questions for me.
Thank you, Becky. Does anyone else have any questions? Does anyone have questions?
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Next proponent, if we would like.
My name's Kent Bodwine, 2885 Old Orchard Trail in Sioux Falls. After watching Kevin's presentation, I'm quite familiar with one of the dairies that was up on the screen. We have a number of dairies throughout South Dakota. I've been in 8 of these zoning meetings, probably from the beginning of when we started in Minnehaha County with a planning and zoning. So we've watched this ordinance change, all the things that have moved through. One of the things that happens when we come in to you to ask for approval is that we have to give notice. And I see that it's changed to put the onus on us, which is great. But I also think besides the certified mail, we also should have regular mail in that. We deal with snowbirds, we deal with people who are gone. The certified mail may not get to that. One of the things we've seen in our number of hearings, some of them pretty contentious, was notice. They didn't know. They didn't know how it affected them, all of these things. So the notice issue for somebody who has a concern. So if we come into here again, we want to make sure everybody knows. And that's a trick that I learned I spent 18 years with a law firm, so we did both the certified and regular mail for that 46-cent stamp is worth it. Second part of this is in the construction of the setbacks. There's an opportunity for us to minimize our setback with a tree planting. Just in looking at the construction, the tree planting plan that used to be in our application, that's been taken out. And I guess I'd like to have that tree planting plan come back in, and then that setback be reduced at the time of the application. So that if we have a tree planting plan and we're entitled to that 50% on the setback, that everybody knows that. So that if I have a 3/4 of a mile setback and it goes to 3/8 of a mile, then everybody's informed of that going into the process. It changes who we'd have to have waivers from, changes a lot of things in terms of how we're dealing with things. And we've done a lot in terms of using trees, utilizing trees to calm the ponds, to distill, the odors in the air, and a lot of that. Done a lot of experimenting through this process. I think it was 2000 or 2001 we got the first CAFO permit. So we've been at this a long time, done a lot of things. But I'm thinking that if people understand what their rights are, who's affected, what we're doing to minimize those effects, I think it's all beneficial. But just like I said, in the construction of this, to me it looked like it's still a little bit nebulous in terms of notices and then in terms of who's actually affected. So if they know that there's a tree plan and that setback is decreased, that's part of the application, rather than one of those questions that everybody wonders. They get this notice, they're half a mile away, but it's only 3/8 of a mile or even smaller. Class B CAFO would only be 3/16 of a mile on the setback. So they'll get the notice, but then they really don't have as much say-so. But we'd like to thank everyone for the work that they've done on this. a substantially different look than what we've had to deal with in the past. When you start looking at large CAFOs, somebody had a question on animal numbers, animal units. Brand new baby heifer calf still counts as one, even though it's 90 pounds. So there are some differences, and like I say, running the dairies, we've been at it a long time and want to keep at it, but I think this is going to make it at least more understandable. We don't have quite the complications that we had in the old, but we do appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Kent. Commissioner Bart, oh, I'm sorry.
I'll ask if I may first. Kent, did you say certified and registered or certified and regular?
Regular.
Regular?
We learned that if somebody wasn't there, they were not going to get that certified, I'm thinking of the snowbirds or
Yep,
the...
thank you. That's what I needed.
So it was regular.
Thank you, Kent. Commissioner Heiberger?
Mine is a little bit for Scott, because I believe I've read it all. There was something in there about trees. I didn't think that we took the trees out. No, the trees are still in there, Kent.
Okay.
Because I've read the whole thing, and the trees have not been removed. So that is extremely important for odor control. So that is there.
Commissioner Karski?
And my question is probably for Scott or Kevin also regarding the trees. Trees allow a reduction of the setback by 50%, but where is that in the process of notification? Is that before? Or that doesn't change the notification, correct?
But it's a half-mile notification, but if I'm going to go get releases from neighbors, that changes who's in that path.
Yep.
So it's a half mile. I think the concern is that it's a half-mile notification, but the setback is 3,960 feet for the obtaining waivers. Is that your concern?
That's a concern, but then if you've got the tree plan in place with the application, then you've decreased that by half.
Okay. So the trees in section, let's see, bring right to the ordinance. 1210C, and you go down to number 5. There's a thing as part of the application process. Before you apply, you have to have any applicable waivers for land use setback reduction. So say if a neighbor did not sign a waiver, we would assume you must have the trees between you and that neighbor. Otherwise, you don't at the time of the application, rather than during the meeting or after the application. So,
But my question is that waiver required still at the full setback, or is it reduced by half?
Well, the waiver, that's the change in the ordinance is that you could, previously you could get required either a waiver or you would be able to do management practices in this kind of obscure definition of what needs to be done before you can reduce a setback. Now, and that reduction would not require a waiver anymore. Now it would be, you can reduce it to that 50%, and that you would not require a waiver from that particular neighbor if you have the landscape plan between you and that neighbor.
Wouldn't require the waiver, but it's still a conditional use process where that neighbor could contest to this board or to the planning board.
Yes.
The process. So the notification is reduced by 50% if you have the tree planting.
No, the notification is still that, but
Yeah, the
but
notification
it's
stays the
yeah.
same. That's what I was not clear on. Okay.
It's the waiver that we're dealing with populated areas, so if I'm looking at a Class A and you go 3,960 feet versus half of that, the number of landowners involved and
Goes down.
diminishes. So that's just my thought in construction of this is make that obvious
But that's not to say those people that are outside of that don't have a voice, because through the conditional use process, they still have a voice.
People from 5 miles away come and argue. It's, everybody gets their moment.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Kent? Thank you, Kent. Is there anyone else as a proponent who would like to speak?
Sir. Nick Sershin, 8713 East Fiddlewood Drive, Sioux Falls. Voice my support of the ordinance. I always applaud any reduction of duplicative regulation or unnecessary regulation, so I think that's a good thing. And would say that any county that's looking for tax revenue, having a multi-million-dollar ag facility would be a good thing. And remember that when it comes time to the conditional use permit process, that you said anybody can come up and contest and protest, but remember, science-related, fact-based, and if you're looking to attract those sorts of groups or organizations to the county, having a polite hearing or a non-contested hearing, or having a conditional use permit that where the additional unnecessary regulations don't pop up is a good thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions for Nick? The next proponent.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Steve Dick, 301 North Vandemark, Hartford, South Dakota. I also serve as Executive Director of an agricultural coalition called Ag United for South Dakota, coalition of 7 groups that represents about 16,000 farm and ranch families in South Dakota. Our organization follows planning and zoning across South Dakota, particularly in the eastern half of the state. And when we meet with your fellow commissioners from other counties, we often mention that Minnehaha County is what we would consider, I don't want to say the friendliest ag county, but I would say it's fair to agriculture. It's also fair to rural residents in our county. There's something like 20,000 people who live in unincorporated Minnehaha County, which would make it probably the 4th or 5th largest county in the state. And I think we've seen, based on the number of farm families that are in Minnehaha County, that agriculture and rural residents can work together because of the rules that are put forth. Certainly the changes that are proposed here, I think agriculture can live with, and I think rural residents should be able to live with as well. You recognize that there are families that are out there that they have that ability to expand. So I compliment the Planning and Zoning Commission for the effort and the staff that they've put into this. So, you know, animal agriculture is really part of a 3-legged stool for our corn and soybeans in the state. You know, energy is obviously one of them. Minnehaha County does not have any ethanol plants. However, within the shadows of our county, there are 4 or 5 ethanol plants that our producers are delivering to. The export market, if you've been to Lyons, you've seen the Central Farmers facility there that loads unit trains that get shipped to the Northwest, and then animal agriculture. And I know that many people will say that, you know, this is just in for the bottom line for the farm families. The reality is agriculture, like any small business out there, you know, struggles. Some years are profitable, some years are not. However, if you think of the spin-off that comes with animal agriculture, and obviously the obviously 800-pound gorilla is the John Morrell facility in Sioux Falls. However, there's other support industries, whether it's local contractors, plumbers, electricians, companies that are fixing pumps and motors on farms like that. So it really does have that impact all across our economy in Minnehaha County, not just with the farm families or the families who work at John Morrell. So I would certainly urge your support of the proposed changes that have been presented to you, and would stand by for any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone have any questions for Steve? If not, the next proponent, please.
Hello, I'm Pete Sonstegard, 2514 South Clark Way, Sioux Falls. And I just wanted to ask for your support for the ordinance. Our family operates a chicken farm in northwest Iowa, and we're looking at what we proposed, and we have started the construction of a facility in Turner County. I wanted to point out that with your rules and the regulations and the maps that the staff put together, it would be obvious to me that this is really a change in the ordinance that supports small family farms and not the bigger operators. You know, bigger operator like ourselves, we would not think about building in Minnehaha County because of the number of rural residents. So I really think it's a push for family farms, smaller operators that you're supporting. And I'm sure you hear plenty about the side effects of CAFOs in your communities and health regulations or health side effects, but I'm standing here telling you about CAFOs, and I work on them all the time. My kids do also, and we have many employees that do it every day, and they come to work every day, you know, so I don't see that as being a valid statement. And also you'll hear about, you know, home prices or property values, and you know, we just brought up John Morrell, who's here in town, and I live within a couple miles of that, and if we can get a reduction on my taxes, I'd appreciate it. But, you know, I don't think that's going to happen. So, you know, South Dakota, the Midwest, we were raised on ag. It's our #1 industry in the state. We feed about 8 million bushel of corn here in South Dakota, and we export 48 million bushel to Iowa and other states because they're feeding animals there. And I believe it's a good tax revenue for all of us. And also to be able to add more residents to the county and put kids in schools and be able to get tax dollars for roads and to support our local infrastructure. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter. Does anyone have any questions for him? Thank you. Any other proponents that would like to speak? Proponents? With that, we will move over to the opponent side. We'd like to hear from the opponents now, please. And you do need to give your name and address.
Hi, I'm Julie Umstead, 48044 256th Street, Garrettson, South Dakota. I have my 2 children with me, and I apologize if they're getting a little antsy. They're not used to long county commission meetings, but it's good for them to come and see how this process works. I want to first publicly acknowledge Commissioner Barth and Commissioner Karski for calling me directly after I wrote a letter. I didn't get to speak with Commissioner Karski, but I applaud both of them for their commitment to public service and reaching out. Even if we disagree, I applaud you both for reaching out and trying to connect with me. I am an opponent to what I would call deregulating CAFOs for multiple reasons. First of all, for the people who think I am a rural resident, I live on 15 acres. And for any of people who think I don't understand agriculture, I'll give you a very quick background. I grew up on a family farm in South Dakota, 100-year century farm going on 125. We're fifth generation family farmers. I own farmland. I'm invested in soybean plants and in ethanol plants. My immediate family members are involved in dairies and in feedlots, quite honestly. My parents raised everything under the sun, any kind of animal you had. I grew up with pigs and cattle myself, so I have some experience in this area. It's not like I don't understand agriculture. I also worked for U.S. Trade or U.S. Grains Council, a international organization or domestic organization that promotes U.S. agriculture abroad. I have been in dairies all over this country and all over the world. I have been in feedlots all over this country, all over the world, chicken farms, swine facilities, so on and so forth. I'm pretty familiar with agriculture. I love agriculture. It is including my family's lifeblood and also including myself. I do have investments in this. I wrote this all in a letter to the commissioners, and I can't possibly read the whole thing. But I want to address a couple of issues in this regard. I live in the country because I want my children to grow up with agriculture, but I don't think CAFOs are traditional agriculture. They are factory farms, and expanding them limits the possibilities for other industry. If we're really talking about money, then you also know that Sioux Falls is booming and expanding. I also have the benefit of having lived, benefit or disadvantage, you can look at it either way, of having lived in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, and a variety, and even overseas in Europe, in urban areas around the world. And I know what happens with expansion, which we like and we don't like. I wanted my kids to grow up in an agricultural area, hence we moved to the country when we moved here about 11 years ago, back from D.C. I wanted to keep it traditional family farming, and I want my children to see traditional family farming. In my view, CAFOs and an expansion of them, reducing the setbacks, all of those kinds of things for rural residents is not traditional family farming. And if you think that this is going to increase the tax base, which of course it will in other ways. You're also limiting what other potential businesses could have, including, as I wrote in my letter, things that are outside of the box that grow in urban areas. So outside of Washington, D.C., for example, those areas that are zoned agriculture in there are hotbeds of industry. And a CAFO would ruin that kind of hotbed of industry. And you may say, how can it be hotbeds of industry? Well, if you look outside the box for traditional agriculture that complements and that lives in harmony with traditional agriculture, you see there are things like the vineyards or the breweries that are coming up around here. There are also things like U-Pick farms, all of that kind of stuff, horseback riding facilities, all those kinds of things which grow and boom in areas that are near to an urban area. And we have to recognize that Sioux Falls is growing in that way, and that a CAFO in one area could ruin all those other opportunities for people like myself. I have 15 acres, and right now we just live with a gecko and a dog and a variety of other critters. But, you know, if I wanted to have a small business and there was a swine facility a quarter mile or a half mile away, I'm not sure anybody would be interested in coming to see my traditional agriculture rural area in that regard. I just want you to think outside the box is what I'm saying, in terms of traditional agriculture and things that live in harmony with traditional agriculture. I guess, you know, a few other things. I can't read my own handwriting because a kid was sitting on my lap as I was trying to do it, but I think that my suggestion would be rather than a limited area for setbacks, I would be in proposing a greater area of setbacks for the rural residents, and in addition to notification for the rural residents who live in there. And then also one last comment, I'm sorry, is that I have an email list with about 40 families that live in my area. And I sent out an email about this, and no one I spoke with had heard of this. And I realize you did your outreach as well as you could, potentially, but none of the families I spoke with had ever heard that these regulations were coming. I'm not sure. I go to my township board meeting. I didn't hear of it there at my township meeting, and no one had heard of it. So I think perhaps that there needs to be a little better outreach to speak with the rural residents, because I didn't know there were 20,000 of us, but you know, not a lot of us have actually heard about this. I only noticed it because it was in the newspaper that finally and Commissioner Bender's comments about having rural residents be a part of the process. So that's probably my 5 minutes, and I'll take my kids who will hopefully learn something from this. Thank you.
You're fine with the time. Julie, have any questions for her?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you for coming, and your kids are great. They certainly are not a problem. Do you have a thought as to what an additional setback would be? And, you know, I can honestly tell you that the newspaper had that article after we called them and asked them to write it. And I can't make you read the newspaper either. What can we do that would communicate better? You know,
flyers in the mailbox. I mean, I guess I don't know. That's a lot of money. I get that. But I mean, certainly I personally notified 40 plus families in this regard because I have an email list set up for that.
I could post
so.
it on my Facebook page.
I mean,
and what about a setback? What would you recommend?
I'm not an expert on that, but I think that I would even propose something like an exclusionary zone. And again, this is maybe a little bit too much, but an exclusionary zone that would be, if you look at urban development, I'm sure Scott would know all these kinds of things about the potential for growth. I mean, I think I read something that Sioux Falls, and you all would know this better than I do, but that Sioux Falls is going to be the size of, you know, Pittsburgh or something in the next 50 years or whatever it is. And that urban growth is going to continue. And please don't think that farmers won't have advantages of this and that the only way to make money is because of putting more CAFOs into their smaller business. Their property values are increasing exponentially. I know mine has, just in the 11 years we've been here. Acreages are desirable. So certainly those property values are going to go up, but nobody will want to move into something next to a swine facility, obviously. But I mean, as some kind of growth projection of how far Sioux Falls is going to grow and how, you know, how wide that area is going to be. I mean, is it going to be city all the way to Hartford? Is it going to be city all the way to Garrettson, where I live? I mean, I'm sure you have those projections. And if you're looking at that, then I would explode. I mean, nobody thinks that way past west past Hartford or way south on the border with Turner County, you know, probably in the next however long, we're not going to reach that. Sioux Falls isn't going to reach that far. But if there's some kind of exclusionary zone of, you know, it has to be this far out based on, based on what the projections are for the growth of the city, might be something to consider. And then also, I mean, the idea that, a quarter of a mile or something for a facility. I mean, I have my neighbor's cows are a mile away, and I like them. They're in the pasture. We watch them, but we can smell them. We're not going to pretend that we can't, who are just that far away. And certainly a mile is not even, is nothing. It goes beyond that. I don't know about 5 miles, but certainly a mile is not a mile from a larger facility is certainly, in my estimation, not a too far of a range.
Thank you, Julie. Any other questions for her?
Thank you.
Thank you. The next opponent, please. Do we have any other opponents?
Hello, my name is Allie Shelfeffer. I live at 26479 482nd Avenue, Brandon, South Dakota 57005. My family and I moved to rural Brandon almost 4 years ago from central Sioux Falls. I am here today to voice my concerns regarding the proposed reduced setback requirements for CAFOs in Minnehaha County. My family and I presently live about 1 mile north of a family dairy farm consisting of approximately 270 dairy cows. We appreciate family dairy farms, and the farm near us has been a very good neighbor. I would say that there are only roughly 6 to 10 days per year in which the smells from the cow manure make it unpleasant to spend time outdoors. I do have concerns, however, regarding the effect on our surrounding environment if that farm was to expand to 1,000 cows. There are many homes in a lot closer proximity to the dairy farm than we are who would bear an even greater burden if the farm significantly expanded under the proposed CAFO regulations. I understand from the Argus Leader article published in July that the reason for the reduced setback requirements are primarily economic in nature. More CAFOs and larger CAFOs in Minnehaha County would certainly yield more revenue. But is this the correct course of action in a county as urban and as densely populated as that of Minnehaha County? In support of the proposed regulations, one official stated in the Argus that he has seen peaceful coexistence between CAFOs and residents in surrounding states. In an effort to educate myself a bit more, I looked at the most recent ag census and compared livestock sales in Minnehaha County with those in Iowa and Minnesota counties having similar population densities. I brought those numbers with me today in print form if you would like to see them, commissioners. The data showed that Minnehaha County, with a population density of 210 persons per average square mile, has livestock sales that exceed that of any other county in Minnesota and Iowa with similar population densities. The next most densely populated county with livestock sales that exceed that of Minnehaha County is Dubuque County, Iowa, with a population density of 154 persons per average square mile, as compared to Minnehaha County's population density of 210 persons per square mile. And Minnehaha County's population shows no sign, the population growth shows no sign of slowing in the near future. I was also baffled by another example that cited in the Argus in support of the proposed regulations. In an effort to illustrate the apparent ridiculous nature of the current setback requirements, one official was quoted as saying that a poultry farm in Minnehaha County with 7 million chickens would require a 27-mile setback. My response upon reading this was good. There's no reason a farm in Minnehaha County should have 7 million chickens. No confined feedlot in the continental United States has 7 million chickens, as the average size of U.S. broiler chicken operations and egg-laying hens in 2012 was 166,000 and 695,000 birds, respectively. I just don't understand how this example is illustrative of the need for greater setback requirements. Finally, it concerns me that meetings have been taking place over the time span of 8 to 12 months with little or no input from rural residents. The July 25th article in the Argus was the first time that my family and many of my neighbors had even heard of these proposed regulations. Given that rural non-farm residents in Minnehaha County exceed that of rural farm residents by greater than a factor of 9, this is a large portion of the rural population whose interests have not been taken into consideration. And while I appreciate the fact that the commission is seeking input from the larger public today, I do have concerns that a 9 a.m. meeting on a workday does not offer many Minnehaha County residents an adequate opportunity to be heard. Given the population density of Minnehaha County, the known adverse effects of large CAFOs on air and water quality, property values, and the increased wear and tear on country roads, I am struggling to see why reducing setback requirements for CAFOs in Minnehaha County makes sense. Accordingly, I urge you to please reconsider the proposed reduced setback requirements for CAFOs in Minnehaha County. And I would also add, just in regards to some of the points that were brought up today, I know that some folks have been with the maps saying that you know, there are certain, there might be certain lands that are ripe for expansion, and you know, that may be, but the statistics, but this CAFO regulation applies to all of Minnehaha County. The statistics that I cited, you know, are the statistics of Minnehaha County, so I ask that the commission take that into consideration. Any questions?
Thank you, Ellie. Any questions for her? Commissioner Bender?
Well, this is partially a question, I mean, and partially a comment probably. One, I really appreciate all the time and energy you spent in sending a letter to all of us, and it was very helpful information, and so I do really appreciate that. And I think that, you know, while we try to do our best in communication, that's been brought up, and we really do try to, you know, publish minutes and all of those kinds of things. We're all very busy, and it's hard to pick up on everything. But I am glad you learned about this. I'm glad everybody that is here learned about it, and that we can get the information and get feedback. I do think that from my perspective, you know, while economics is always important, a lot of this was driven by changes in science in the ways that operations are able to conduct themselves, and we're just trying to stay up with that science and stuff. So I don't think, well, there's certainly an economic component to this. I think there's a lot of science-based research that, just like every other business and every other thing that we do, we're just trying to stay up with the times a little bit, which we struggle with a lot here.
And that makes sense. And I would remind the commission that the notice requirements as proposed are limited to a half mile radius. I know our family, we live, you know, a mile from this, you know, current dairy farm. And I would say that there are, you know, definitely, as I said in my letter, you know, 6, depending upon the year, to 10 days per year where one wouldn't want to spend a lot of time outdoors. We would certainly, as I understand, be outside of that notice requirement. I do have concerns regarding that as well. Thank you.
Other questions for Ellie? Commissioner Kursky?
Maybe not as much for Allison, but again for our planning office. She lives within a mile of a 250 head dairy operation. If they wanted to expand to 1,000 head dairy operation, what's the process? What is it? A new conditional use permitting process? We allow for expansion, but
we would treat that just like a brand new conditional use permit.
Okay.
And we would follow the notification requirements. And I certainly appreciate the feedback and the input that I get from citizens about notification. And that's always a tricky subject because we don't have indefinite funds to to send out a postcard every time we get a conditional use permit request to the 20,000 address points out in the county, because it's not economically feasible. So one of the other options and one of the other methods that we use to notify the public is if you should be driving by a CAFO, I mean, you will see when we post a conditional use permit, we post a large green sign. Or if it's a rezoning, it's a large red sign. And citizens should notice those things. And when you see a sign that says in big letters, conditional use permit's been requested, that should be a trigger to call someone at the county and say, I see there's a conditional use permit sign. So there's that method. So we post signs, we send hearing notices. In this case, it would be like a half mile to all the property owners. We post that, we have a website. We post our planning commission agendas approximately 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the meetings. So, you know, there is somewhat of a request from the planning department to the citizens that you also need to follow this. I mean, if it's important, you should be looking on our website at our planning commission agendas and we try to inform people as much as we can. We post those planning commission agendas in front of the planning office. We post them outside, before the meetings. We really do try to notify as many people as we can. So, but to answer your question, we treat it like a brand new conditional use permit. We notify people, we work with the township. There's many methods that we use.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow on with Scott for a second.
Sure.
Scott, is there a way to sign up for automatically notification, getting an email from the planning when there's an agenda or something?
We don't have that option now.
Okay.
And that's something that we could, but I suppose I will say that I would have to work with IT. I don't know what the.
It looks like the.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yes, there is a link
These
on
young
the
people,
website.
they know all this tech stuff.
Okay.
The young
There is a
guys.
link in the website, and I tested it with my personal email. It does work.
Okay.
So how does that work, Kevin?
I can't remember. It's been a
Do you
while
sign
since I
up for it?
There is a sign up online that you can send your email address in, and then you get regular meeting up wherever a new agenda is posted or minutes are posted. It automatically notifies you that it's been posted. So.
Thank you. I stand corrected.
Scott.
If I could, I just want to make another comment. Pete Sonstegard. They also have the opportunity to oppose a permit at the state level, because with 1,000 animal units, it'll also go to the state. So there'll be a second opportunity to oppose a potential permit, even if the county does elect to pass it.
Thank you.
The next opponent, please. Is there anyone else who would like to speak against the condition or the proposed zoning ordinance?
Morning. My name is Jennifer Schmidtbauer, 48252 264th Street, Brandon. I'm also a supervisor for Split Rock Township, and my comments today reflect my personal feelings as a county resident, as well as what I feel are the best interests for Split Rock Township. I echo what Allie said earlier about public input. The city has been pursuing some annexation discussions, and the first meeting was at 2 p.m. on a weekday. And they also got similar feedback to what you're getting about the convenience of being able to come and share the inputs. So they moved those meetings till 5:30 in the afternoon so people who are working could come and give their input. I did talk to several residents who were not able to make it today because of work. I do reiterate concerns that have already been shared. So as to not be redundant, what I want to address is the waste management associated with these operations. The volume of the waste is absolutely going to affect our air and water quality. One Holstein cow produces about 115 pounds of manure a day. That's according to the University of Illinois Extension Office. I did find that number repeated multiple places. 1,000 cow operation would produce 42 million pounds of manure a year. That's got to go somewhere. When it rains, that's going to run off. You're going to smell it. These graphs where you show the zone of nuisance are around the site where the animals are. I'm curious how you mitigate odor when that 42 million pounds from one CAFO is spread over multiple miles or acres of land. That odor moves, and I don't know, are trees to be planted around where the manure gets spread? So that is a concern. Water quality certainly is an issue, especially if the ordinance no longer requires the manure to be incorporated into the soil. We have heavy rainfalls of increasing intensity and regularity, so that seepage into private wells, aquifers, or simply runoff into rivers will impact recreational use, wildlife, and perhaps even drinking sources. So I just feel that the responsibility, especially for a county like Minnehaha, where we have a tremendous population density, the interests of the majority have to be taken into concern over maybe the special interests of a few. I do appreciate agriculture. I grew up on a farm in central Minnesota. It is now a really big industrial industry, and like all industry, there are certain regulations that are put in place to not harm people who might be in proximity. So I just ask that you consider where those huge volumes of waste are going and the impacts in addition to what's already been cited.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone have any questions for her? Thank you. Next person, next opponent, please.
I'm Jeff Sorensen. We're at 48186 257th Street, Garrettson, which is actually about 3.5 miles north of Brandon. I talk about the reduction in setbacks and regulations and also the process. We went through this just about a year ago. 9 neighbors between a 1/4 mile and a 1/2 mile of an approved CAFO. I think it's Class C, 999 units. In terms of the setbacks, what we were to understand was that it was a 1/4 mile setback, which he was able to kind of place. There was like one tiny spot between all 9 of us in which that worked, to be further than a 1/4 mile. But then was led to understand by staff that if he wanted to expand that to the next size, which would violate those setbacks, unless he'd had a violation in the size that he was, that was basically a done deal. You just come in, get the permit, be able to expand the operation without having to go through the normal kind of process. And what, if I'm to understand it right, and maybe I don't, is that the manure management plan and the pest plan no longer being expected or monitored for by the county, but the state permit only kicks in to monitor those things at 1,000 units. So that, for instance, this operation that was at 999 units wouldn't have that. They wouldn't have had to have the state permit because it's not that large, but yet was within like a 1/4 mile of 9 units. Do not favor reduction in the setbacks. And I want to talk about that a bit from economics. It was just this last week I was visiting with a family, not near us, who purchased an acreage, rural acreage, bare land, and shortly after purchasing it, talking to neighbors, heard that a swine facility is being talked about by somebody that purchased adjoining land, and they didn't know that when they bought their land, and so they're not building. They're not doing anything. They would have built a rural development, a rural home, but until that's all resolved, they're staying put. That land is sitting there, and for them, if the process in a way would allow earlier notification, and I don't know how you do that, but in terms of economics, yes, agriculture contributes to our economy, but so do, and also to the tax base, all these 20,000 homes out there of people that are in our county. I want to talk a bit about process. And in order to do so, this becomes a little bit of pointing fingers. But our process of the 9 of us coming to talk about this was not well. We received notice from the farmer, and the first place that we were able to see what actually was being proposed was in the meeting in which it was to be approved. That was a pretty contentious session, in which it was really said to those of us who were resisting this, if he meets regulations, you don't have a voice. If he meets the setbacks, he has met what's expected, and that's it. And in fact, Commissioner Barth said, perhaps those of you who are opposing this want to buy the land. Buy him out so that, because he has land rights as well. What I encouraged at the end of all that process, because some said, why don't you go back and talk to each other about this, and we did. So we got together, neighbors, at the place where he was proposing to build, and we talked about it together. And we suggested to him, for your manure plan, instead of an open pit that could get rained on and all of the manure just gets stinkier and draw more flies, would you cover it? He said, I could do that. The plan that he had proposed did not include that. We suggested, how about if you wrap trees all the way around it instead of just to the north, so those of us who are on the east and west of you would also get some protection and filter by those trees. He said, I can do that. We said, you already have a mature grove most of the way around you, which you're proposing to tear down. Would you leave a good share of that so that in the first 20 years before your shelter belt grows up, those will serve as a filter in those first years as well? He agreed to that. If you had into place some kind of process where the person who's proposing to do something like this first has to talk to your neighbors, all of that contention, all of that making enemies of each other wouldn't have had to happen. Because together, when we were able to talk about it, we came up with something that worked for us. And so that's my encouragement, is not to make the process for coming in and being able to appeal this later, but make it earlier. And a lot of this would be resolved with each other if we were able to sit with each other ahead of time instead of in some kind of legal match with each other after the fact. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any comments, questions? Commissioner Bender?
I remember a little bit about the situation, and I'm sure living through it was very emotional and difficult, but I question when you say that the process didn't work, because when I'm sitting here listening to you, it seems to me like the process worked very well. We had the public hearing. You guys had an opportunity to present your concerns. Mm-hmm. We sent it back for you guys to try to work something out, and you did. You guys reached an agreement that seems to have worked for everybody. So, I mean, I can understand maybe having it earlier, so maybe it would have reduced the angst a little bit. But I mean, it does sound to me like the process worked. So I want to see if I'm missing something.
And maybe I'm misreading what the proposal is, but if you're moving it back, that not earlier but later comes the time for the public hearing. I think that moves the process back and makes it instead of earlier, as well as it worked in terms of getting him to agree to those kind of conditions. If he had not agreed, our understanding basically is it would have been approved anyway, because he met the requirements. And especially if you're taking away the requirements for pest and management plans with the county at 999 units and less, there's no teeth in that at all. There's nothing. He doesn't have to do anything. And so if we had failed to come to an agreement with him, he would have been allowed to go ahead. We'd have hated each other for years. It would have not been well. But if there was something in place and I don't know if other counties do this, is have you talked to your neighbors? Have you had somebody sit with you in a session to talk about how this affects each other, how we can live together, how we can make this work before a plan comes in place? Then that hating of neighbors wouldn't have had to happen. And I would say with the guy that we worked with, he and I have become friends. It's because I reached out to him and I said, we got to be neighbors about this. That hasn't happened with the other neighbors. So.
Commissioner Karski?
I missed your name, sir. I'm sorry.
Jeff Sorensen.
Jeff, thank you. First of all, congratulations on doing it the right way.
Yeah.
We've all, especially in these seats, have seen way too many instances of bad neighbors. And when we can see good neighbors working together, that's the best possible outcome. That being said, we can't legislate good neighbors. It's just not possible, as hard as we try. As part of the conditional use process, what we are trying to do is to get that input from the neighbors we'd be okay with this if you hadn't, met with your neighbor and them agreeing to it outside of it, as part of that process to put these conditions on that you cover your manure pit, you grow trees, you leave a grove of trees, whatever that is. So we do allow for, this does allow for that input from the neighbors so that if you aren't happy with the way it is coming, and it's not just a done deal, slam dunk just because you met all these requirements, a conditional use process follows each and every one of these where we get that input and we get to decide with you and with the landowner what is the best possible solution for making this work for everybody concerned. So appreciate you doing it the way you did and reaching out and being a good neighbor, and that's pretty much what we're trying to get everybody to the table with this process. So thank you.
Sure. But a comment back to that is that, if I'm being understood, if our neighbor proposing the feedlot had not agreed to the changes that we asked, he would have met the requirements. And now, by removing those requirements for $9,99 and less, he doesn't even have to be asked those things. And so if that neighbor had, if he had not agreed to those things, my understanding is you're out of luck. And that makes it more difficult for the rural residents, not less. You follow? If he had not agreed, if he said, no, I'm not going to leave those trees, no, I'm not going to plant more, no, I'm not going to cover my manure pit, we would have been out of luck.
Scott, can you talk to that?
Well, that would have been discussed at the conditional use permit in front of the county commission, and those, I think the county commission could have heard the concerns of these 9 residents, and you certainly have the option of requiring shelter belts, putting a cover over a pit. And I just also want to clarify from a planning perspective and our planning office perspective is when we have an applicant come to us, and it's regardless of whether it's for a CAFO, a daycare, a dog kennel, it doesn't make any difference. I can't tell you how strongly we encourage them to contact their neighbors before they start getting notices and before it goes to the planning commission. And in Mr. Sorensen's case, I recall the gentleman that applied for the CAFO or for the feeding operation was 19 or 20 years old. And sometimes that's just, it's a life skill that you can't always pass on to people to say, I want you to go talk to your neighbors, because people are fearful. I don't know, it's just the way it is. You're sometimes very afraid to go talk to people, and so they just won't. It just is so frightening to them. But I will really strongly, I will tell you that we strongly encourage people to reach out and work with people before it all goes to the planning commission. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
But it is proper to say that this board could put
Yes.
conditions on that even if they meet all the requirements.
That's
So
correct.
we could put additional conditions on through that process, so.
Commissioner Bender, did you have a question?
Well, I have a follow-up question for Scott. Can you comment to the issue that somebody that's an existing producer couldn't expand without there being any new notice, and then the whole waste management plan issue?
As I indicated before, if you're moving up from a class C to a class or a class C to a class B, if you're moving up into animal units, you are required, like I said, to start basically as if it's a brand new conditional use permit. So you are required to go through a hearing process, notify neighbors, it goes to the planning commission, and that is a requirement. So
that process is not changing?
Does not change.
Okay. And then, so the issue about waste management and the fact that we're now ceding that authority to the state, do they have to get a permit from the state if they have less than 1,000 units?
No, they do not.
Okay. So right now, and so that is a difference.
It is.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other, excuse me, any other questions? Are there any other opponents?
Good morning, Matt Staub, 48206 265th Street, Brandon, South Dakota. I also am a township supervisor in Split Rock Township, which, as you all know, is the most populated township within the state of South Dakota. We went through this 12 years ago, 10 years ago with the Odie Dairy. I don't know if any of you members were on the board at the time. So
We
this
were
is-
not.
This is kind of
I'm the
or
oldest
Act Two
one,
for
and
us.
that's Before my time.
And you've been on the longest, right? of
That's
these
right, it
fellas?
was before
Yeah.
me.
I think Bob Colby was on.
He's gone.
He's left. And I was also city commissioner 25 years ago, so I bring that city, county thing, and I'm one of these evil city people that moved out and want to keep the farmers under. My wife and I own farm ground in Brule County. My wife's family all run about 3,000 head of cattle in Brule County, as was stated before. We're all pro-family farms. We're all pro-farmers. When you get into the big CAFOs, we're talking industrial farming. It's no longer traditional family farming. And as a resident of the township and as the supervisor of the township, I'm trying to look out for the residents that live out there. What Scott just said about people being afraid to talk, I have a unique perspective in that was in office, was out for 20 years, and now back in. And after I was kicked out of office in 19 whatever it was, the number of people that would come to me and say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I didn't like it when you did this. I didn't like it when you did that. And to which I would say, where were you when I was at City Hall? I was in my office every day. You could have called. Well, I didn't want to bother you. And I know you folks realize that, but I don't know that to the degree that that happens. I still get yelled at for the baseball stadium. The baseball stadium was rebuilt. My son's 25, we built 26 years ago. We were out there last night and I had somebody come up and say, I really like it, but 26 years later. So you folks are in a little bit of a vacuum. And I know that from firsthand experience because, like I said, 20 years later, I still get it. Jeff, you had mentioned about notices and stuff. How do we let people know? Again, Split Rock Township has the best website of any township in the state of South Dakota because it's the only one. And we struggle with getting people to meetings, and we're out talking and trying to get people to come. We didn't know about this. Jennifer and I are on the board. We got that letter that was sent out to the township supervisors. Get your people, or go talk to your people. It's like, didn't know about it. And perhaps some blame's on us. We should be watching what you're doing. But to be honest with you, people are tired of having to watch their feds, watch their state, watch their county, watch their city, watch their townships. I mean, is this important? Yeah, but so is what John Thune and Mike Rounds are doing and what the governor's doing. And we can't watch them all. That's why we send you guys to office. That's why we're there. That's why Jennifer and I got elected. Both of us were elected in the elections that had more people than most townships have. More people turned out for the election than most townships have in total people. Because we went out there and informed people and all that. But anyway, that's getting off the sidetrack there. What I would like to see the board do is, as a former city resident, and it's been alluded to, maybe a 3-mile complete no new CAFOs around Sioux Falls, because it's all coming, folks. You might as well just say, sorry, we're within 3 miles of Sioux Falls and maybe 2 miles of the smaller towns. You just can't put a CAFO in. I own a small business here in town. I can't sell cigarettes. I can't put a 4x4 sign out in my yard because that violates zoning ordinances. Farmers aren't the only ones that face restrictions. I can't sell beer. I can't have Diddly the Lottery. I can't sell groceries. I have a propane tank out front. It's got to be X number of feet away from the building. There's a lot of things I can't do on my own property. And, if we're allowed to do whatever we want on the farm ground, then I should be allowed to do whatever city-type things I want to do on city property. Why can't I put up a a huge medical waste facility or something of that nature. I mean, there need to be restrictions. The conditional use permitting process was talked about a little bit. Again, then you're putting people with $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 homes into the hands of, no offense, 5 elected people or 3 in townships circumstances. And that's, you're spending a lot of money on a home and putting your faith into 5 people you don't know. And you guys are all being lobbied. You know, we're all political hacks, all 6 of us, 7 of us. We know the phone calls we get. We know the letters we get. We know the checks that were written when we run for office. Sometimes it's hard to say no. Sometimes it's hard to say yes. Let's worry about everybody. Again, in my own business, I can't do whatever I want. Would I love to be able to expand and hand my business over to my children? Be great. It's not going to happen. The internet's killing us, small businesses, and we're done. Nobody gives a damn about the old mom and pop liquor stores, the old mom and pop grocery stores, and the mom and pop gas stations. They're all gone. So with that, I have any questions, or I'll answer any questions if anybody has any.
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Heiberger or Bender?
This is a question that goes back to planning, but it's based off of Mr. Staub's comments. I'm curious, when I look at this, the maps that you guys did that shows what areas could be developed, like even like Class D. I mean, it looks like there is a fair big setback around the communities, and I just was curious whether you've calculated based on
I like
this.
what I see. I'll be completely honest. I mean, I could talk about this all day long, and everybody's covered all this. My only concern is, let's just say, and I'll do the Odies. I don't mean to pick on Greg and Doug because they're my neighbors, and you know, we sit together on the Board of Equalization, and I drive by their house every single day. And I don't know how the process works for county zoning, but can they conditional use permit one in there? Again, that gets back to me having to rely on 3 of you folks to say no when the pressures are on, well, you're anti-ag, you're anti-farmer. Well, no, we're not anti-ag, we're not anti-farmer. So, you know, let's say somebody buys all of Iverson Crossing, tears all the houses down, and wants to put 10,000 cattle in there. Can you conditional use permit that? You know, there's always an out, and that conditional use permit makes me nervous. You know? Because how many conditional use permits do you folks actually turn down on a percentage basis? It's pretty small. So, yeah, if I knew there was no CAFO going in these great areas, I wouldn't even be here. I wouldn't have a problem at all. I think that's a beautifully produced map right there. I think 90% of the people in the town or in the county and in this room would say we can live with that. But then when you can permit via conditional use, that kind of throws that map out the window. So, and I don't know how that process works. Scott would have to answer that one, or one of the staff.
Maybe Kevin can answer that.
Thank you all. And
Thank
to the people that sat on the committee and the boards, God bless you all. I know it was a lot of work, and you're hearing all the negatives coming from us. We don't mean it. 90% of what you did, we're in totally complete and utter agreement with. So it's just the edges that we're not in agreement with. Thank you.
Kevin, do you have a comment?
All right. So at this point, I will comment that it's a little bit of a mapping error in there. Those setbacks, as described in municipal boundaries on the ordinance, do decrease for the smaller CAFOs, and these setbacks shown here are for Class A CAFOs, even though they're projected for a Class D. But say if this is an operation wanting to go to a Class A operation in that zone, they would have to get the city council to pass a resolution stating that they can allow that operation before we will even take the permit.
So the 3-mile joint jurisdiction around the city with other communities?
So it would be a 2.5 mile boundary from Sioux Falls and Brandon, which are the Class A, are the first class cities, and then 1.5 mile from second-class cities, which include all but Sherman, and then Sherman as less than 500 people, it would be 1 mile.
But that particular piece of the ordinance still stays with the ordinance as currently adopted? Or
That would be,
approved?
yeah, the new change, yep. Right now, if there, that is roughly where the boundary for the joint zoning jurisdiction is as well, and they have different CAFO regulations than what we would be proposing here even, so.
Commissioner Bender?
So I just want to clarify, so this map doesn't actually show a
So-
Class D.
No, Class D would be, from a Class C, first class is 1 mile, so it'd be approximately 2/5 of that distance from the city boundaries. So I suppose it
Get
would,
us a slide that shows what Class D would be?
so I would be approximately at the highway, I would say, for 1 mile from the city. So right here at Highway 11 would be the 1 mile for a Class D, and that would be anything between 500 and 250 animal units.
50 and 249.
Excuse me, you're right.
Yeah.
50 and 250, yep.
You want to repeat that again, Commissioner Heiberger?
It's, Class D is 50 to 249, and the other thing is it's joint jurisdiction is my understanding, and so county couldn't do anything without the city's approval.
Correct. And the joint jurisdiction has a different ordinance as well. They don't have any regulations, it's just concentrated animal feeding operation is allowed, but it's through a conditional use permit, and you'll have to make up the regulations between that, but have to be approved by the city as well.
Any other comments, Commissioner Karski?
Two, I guess. First, Matt, nice haircut. Yeah. No. We've had, in my 8 months on the board, only one conditional use permit that I can recall, and it was regarding a CAFO out on the west side of Sioux Falls. And we did make some changes. We did approve it with changes, but we don't, it's not like at the city level where you're seeing them almost every week. At the county level, we don't get quite that many, but with public input, we did make some
Correct.
changes. So just to, you know.
And I get that. I appreciate that, Commissioner. But I also understand the political pressures that are out there. I mean, if the six of us were having a conversation without the cameras and the microphones and all that, obviously would be speaking in a little bit different terms. But I realize how difficult that is, and that's why I'm standing up and saying, you know what, there's life after you're out of office. You know, I've been accused of being a tree hugger, and I've been, you know, the guy that burns firewood to heat his house and has about 4 cords of wood in his yard. You know, I'm the tree hugger, and I'm the farm guy, and, you know, and I love it when the funkies plow the field across the road, because I love that smell, because I'm a gardener, and I measure my summer by how fast the corn and the beans grow, and I like to guess what the yield's going to be, because I'm out the farm a lot at the in-laws, and yet I understand that you don't want to be accused of being negative and anti and all that, but life goes on after political office, and sometimes we overthink some of these things, and
Commissioner
I
Heiberger?
appreciate that.
I don't know if we're done with the opponents or not, but I just wanted to say this has been extremely civil. It isn't fun to sit up here and have people that are very contentious on both sides, and it hasn't been that way. I think we come in here feeling it's not fun to sit up here and make a decision. I live in rural county, as does Gene Bender, and I don't think we're done, but I will throw out there that I live a mile west of me is a 2,400 finishing unit for hogs. A mile north of me is 2,400's baby pigs nursery. About would be probably, if it, by the crow flies, maybe 2 miles, maybe not, 1.5 miles. There's a 300 unit nursery for pigs, and there's 2 530 finishers. I used to spread manure, sow manure, right next to my house. I didn't like it, but now it's all knifed in. It's been years since I've smelled anything, and the nursery, I drive by that nursery all the time and I don't smell it. And I've had supper on a deck outside the 300-unit nursery of little pigs, and I didn't smell it until I went over and opened the door to show my grandson the baby pigs. I get it, because I live out there, and there was days 15, 20 years ago I couldn't put my clothes on the clothesline because it stunk so bad, but it doesn't anymore. I mean, they're knifing, in my area anywhere, they're knifing into the ground, and I'm not smelling it. You know, I'd say in the last year and a half, I've maybe smelled it once. But that's where I'm living.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Any else? Matt?
Follow-up question.
You'll need to come to the mic.
The Commissioner, you brought up a great point, and that's the incorporating the waste into the soil. Makes a huge difference. You all got an email from me last spring. Not all, Dean, you probably didn't, but it was bad. And the person that was not incorporating the waste material into the soil should have known better. We all know who I'm talking about. Are you taking that requirement out in these, that they don't have to incorporate? Because it does make a huge difference. We can live with it. As Jennifer said, the CAFO itself isn't the problem. It's when they spread the manure. And it was more than unbearable. And I relayed this story in my email. We were at the Attic restaurant and bar in Sioux Falls. We could smell it. And the way that I knew that that's where it came from was by the CAFO south of Brandon, is that I stopped 3 times along the way to check township roads, and the smell was still there. So Sioux Falls, or the Attic restaurant and bar, to that place, I think, was 5 miles. There was nobody out on the deck because you couldn't stand to sit out. This is in Sioux Falls. I wrote the email to you folks. Somebody must have called and they got it done, and it was much better. And if you're going to take that requirement out, you might as well just take the whole thing away, because if they're going to surface supply and not incorporate, there's no point in having any ordinances. You got to have them incorporated. Otherwise, it's unbearable. You've been there. You cannot go outside.
Till it rains. Till it rains. Yeah.
Morning, my name is Phil Taw. I live at 400 East 20th Street, Sioux Falls, 57105. You might ask yourself, why does a guy living in McKenna Park care about what goes on out in the rural county? My wife and I also have the privilege of owning a little home on the Missouri River down in Gayville and Yankton. We're having our own fight down there with a different commission and different circumstances, and not to bore you with that. But the first role of government is to protect its citizens. I don't think that's happening. I know you want to. I know you're trying, you're asking the right questions. And I appreciate all the work that Scott and folks have done to try and resolve the 1998 conflicts. So I probably have more questions than comments. One is, have you folks heard from, had a briefing from the DNR folks from the state on their plan for CAFO management and general permit use? Did you get any input from DNR?
We researched.
Okay. Okay. Because that plan was, their updated plan was released in April or May of this year, 2017. And I just was briefed, or is at a commission meeting where they talked about the new plan, because they kept revising it and waiting for the EPA and lawsuits and throughout the country and within the region. My problem is not necessarily with the plan, but it's with the enforcement. And you don't have to have a general permit until you have a class B or C. And even then, at the state level to DNR, there are only 10 folks on that staff to inspect right now the 430 CAFOs in this state. Only 4 of which fall under this new plan because they're that new. The other 400 plus have 4 years to come into compliance or decide what they want to do. My concern is enforcement, and I'm not sure we have a good plan for that. My other concern in general is that what we're talking about in this county and throughout this state from politicians at the very highest level on down, is trying to get in more revenue. I understand that. There's a lot of pressures out there. Mr. Staub related to the fact that small businesses and the one I'm involved with, it is difficult to compete with the internet and et cetera. But we're talking about trying to change our way of life here in South Dakota with CAFOs. We're not anti-farm. We're not anti-agriculture. I'm anti-factory farm. And those who make that money are big ag and the big bankers who loan those monies and those funds to that farmer to get deeper in debt to build a building or to have more land. And the land is artificially raised in price because of that square acre that they can produce with animals. And I love my beef and I love my pork. I love grilling it. But it's hard to find that piece of pork like I grilled on a grill in the 1960s or 1970s with my father. It doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't taste the same because it's not grazed, etc. There's lots of issues with that. My other concern is not just with the odor, and I know we've talked a lot about the odor and the smell, because that is the immediate concern. My question, and we've talked to the South Dakota State University professor who was the scientist behind the odor plan, using prevailing winds. That's only half the equation, and not even half the equation. What about the terrain? What about the trees? What about the Bernoulli effect of valleys? And what about the fact that it's not just the smell? There are airborne particulates that are poisonous to our children who breathe 20 to 50% more air than us adults. And they're downwind of this stuff more than just the 91st percentile, the 99th percentile at a half a mile. Only notification of a half a mile from a proposed CAFO, my opinion, that's ridiculous. The reason farmers are, these big factory farms are getting requests or protests, if you will, or concerns from people 5 miles away is because that odor plan is flawed. We all know we can smell John Morels at different times. We get it. We live in the city sometimes. It's what happens. It's industry, okay? But when you're out in the country and you've lived there and there are private property rights, I get that. But even McKenna Park, you can't build a house too big or too close. Well, maybe you can. Anyway, I digress. We all have to obey different rules no matter where we live, whether we're a business in town or a farmer out in the field or our neighbors, and we help each other, and we want to help that industry grow. I want South Dakota to be a leader in CAFO free meat, for example, with CSAs, or community-supported agriculture, co-ops, farmers markets, those things. The price of food was mentioned. We all want cheap food. Kind of. I want nutritious food also. And the reason some of this, our meat products and our grain products are cheaper is because it's subsidized at the highest level in the United States in the millions of dollars that those farms are, and those big agriculture is subsidized to make that food cheap, to make the feed cheap, so that we can feed our cattle, we can feed our pigs. And everyone is a little bit different. But from 1995 to, I believe, 2001 or 2, of the $162 billion of subsidies, 74% of that money went to 10% of those interests, the big ag industries. They didn't go to our farmers here locally to help them come up with different and better ideas. We need to make sure that when we make these changes to our zoning requirements, that we put some teeth into the inspections, because the DNR at the state level cannot, and they do not do it. They only do it for the larger ones, and they do it up to the point of construction and verification that it's done correctly. After that, they don't have the manpower or the ability to go into some of the CAFOs, particularly the swine ones, because of the biological hazard, which is almost as worse than my experience in the Air Force with biological hazards and handling of those materials. So I encourage you to reconsider all these reduced setbacks. They need to be larger than what they are. The notification needs to be larger, and we need to work together as a community to solve these problems socially, economically, and environmentally, and be responsible in all three of those areas. There's study after study across the U.S. in North Carolina, Missouri, Iowa, in Minnesota that show the devastation to all three of those areas, and not just a few little tax dollars, because eventually you're going to have to fix the roads. And Big Ag's not going to come in here and give you $1 million to repave 246 or put oil down so the dust doesn't carry those airborne particulates to our schools that you say only a mile away from the schools. Holy smokes, not near enough. That's all. Any questions, I'll answer some.
Any questions for Phil? Is there anyone else, either opponent or proponent, who would like to speak?
Dana Losky, 2701 Thomas Circle, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I addressed the county commission several weeks ago as a representative of Friends of the Big Sioux River, basically telling you that we endorse clean, sustainable agriculture practices, and that having things like a CAFO is not necessarily the lightning rod for poor water quality. Actually, every time when CAFO's your original permit was almost 20 years old, and the technology and the processes and the learning that has happened in the last 20 years as far as permitting, siting, and running a CAFO operation has advanced. And so every time you build a CAFO, you're probably improving the water quality in the area. So that was the main message I brought to you then, and I still stick by that. And so I don't think we should have immediate, when you hear the CAFO, that you're going to see that our water's going to go to hell and so forth. But there are some things that we should consider. Standardizing, the county standardizing their permit and aligning with the state, I think is a good idea. Anytime you can update and reduce some regulations and make them address the situation today is good. But I think you have to understand that having Minnehaha County look like the rest of the counties in the state is probably an impossible task. I think the rest of the counties in the state would love to have the growth that we've had here, would love to face the fact that the city of Sioux Falls' population is going to grow from probably 250,000 in our SMSA today to probably 450,000, almost double in about 20 years. And you can't say that in any other cities. You're going to have a lot of or any other county, you're going to have a lot of residential pressures, more people coming in here saying, I don't want this, I don't want that. So I think you really have to consider, do you want to just blanket take the same process that the state has and apply that to Minnehaha County? I think you have to take a little more consideration with all the growth that's going on. Again, I say aligning and relying on the state DNR permit is good. The permit is very good, but you got to realize it's a paper permit. The previous gentleman brought up some of the same points. The DNR has no enforcement. We've doubled the number of dairy cattle in the state, and we have the same number of inspectors or advisors that we had then. There's no plans to add any other staff. We've asked for that. We feel that it would make it a lot better process that the DNR and the CAFO producer start working together from the very beginning, so there's a partnership, that there's a friendly, so they can take the learning they've had from other CAFO operators and problems we might have encountered in soil or terrain or whatever, that they can apply and give that advice to a new operator. And the DNR doesn't want to do that. We've asked them to have regular visits from the time that it's completed. I think the next time you might have a visit is 3 years down the road. We've asked for, why not have regular visits, monthly visits, quarterly visits. There's a lot of problems that could be avoided, a lot of things that could be worked out with neighbors and local officials, that if you had some cooperation, but it's an antagonistic relationship. And it's not so much on the producer side of it, it's more on the DNR side of it. And that's not something you guys can fix, but I think that's something you should consider, the fact that everybody that's a citizen in this state thinks that somebody else is looking out for the water quality, they're looking out for the air quality, and that is so untrue. There's nobody doing that unless a citizen looks out for it. So I applaud everybody that comes in here and says, I'm concerned what's going to happen down the road, whether it's a quarter mile or half a mile, because that's what the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, when it comes to non-point source pollution, that's what it requires, is citizen enforcement. And one final point I want to make is that if there is a complaint and you're calling to the DNR, there is no 48-hour turnaround that says, geez, I saw a manure spill over here, that they're going to get out there and immediately find out the source and correct it. They might go that direction in 2 weeks from now, and that might be the earliest you see a DNR agent out there to look at things. And by then, everything may be gone and everything's okay, and case are off, life goes on, and it may happen again. So I just want you to consider the fact that there is no enforcement. There is nobody other than the citizens that have to look out for their own property. So I thank you very much for your opportunity to address the commission.
Any questions? Excuse me, Commissioner Barth.
Dana, thank you so much for that input, and I really appreciate the previous speaker on the idea of enforcement, because I do believe we had the DENR people in to speak to the Planning Commission one time about their enforcement, and it is an important thing that, you know, when we tell the neighbors that we're going to enforce this, that that we, you know, follow through and make sure that it's done. I think, you know, there are too many of the older style operations in our county that are could be considered bad actors by the modern technology that's available. And, you know, as we transition hopefully to operations with zero runoff and fully engineered systems, I think that's where our Planning Commission, I believe, would like to go, and hopefully the full commission. There's things that we would hope to do, and you know, as we slide into the future, we need to try to pull up the other operations into the and we're updating things. We think we're trying to update things to change circumstances in the 20 years since it was last updated. And appreciate your input a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Any other questions for Dana, Commissioner Karski?
One of the questions that Dana and the previous speaker brought up was about enforcement, and that was one of my questions yesterday too. When I talked to Kevin, it was what's first, the state permit? And he said no, it goes through the county process. So it's up to the county to approve it before the state permit will even be issued. So there is a process for doing that. So it does come here locally before it goes to the state level. And just it was a question I had, and information for you also, so that you understand that how that process works. It doesn't begin at the state; it does begin locally here. So
I guess I'll just chime in on that too. Dana indicated that you know, it may be weeks before you hear from DENR if you file a complaint, and I will tell you that we do our own code enforcement, our own zoning enforcement here at the county, and I have gotten complaints. I got the complaint from Mr. Staub, and I was out to that producer the very next day. So it's not like we do actively do code enforcement, and when we get a complaint, we investigate that and take action. So to that point, we do our own code enforcement.
And to that same line, Mr. Staub had asked about, you know, application of manure. It's up to your office to approve anything other than tilled in. Is that correct, or what's that process work?
And that's the other. I will tell you that we are not changing we're not amending or modifying our requirements for injecting or applying waste. So what's in the ordinance now is going to remain, and so if you have to knife in liquid manure, and so if it's solid manure, you can spread that on the land, and that's not changing from our current ordinance.
There's a whole section in here on that.
Yeah.
Scott, if I have permission to ask a follow-up question. So just to be clear, the process starts with you, but you're not going to be, there's no requirement about a waste management plan in our office. That goes to DENR, but you are still going to enforce that part of it?
Well, the section of the ordinance that deals with the application of waste, that is not changing, and that would be an item that we would enforce in our office.
What about other aspects of a waste management plan?
If we will refer to DENR if it's the larger CAFO waste management plan or manure management plan.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Scott, so when a person comes to us and makes the application and we go through it, we still require them to get the process going with the DENR before they can build it, right?
That's correct.
So the fact that, you know, it begins here doesn't mean we bypass the DENR. We have to get those approvals, just like if you were to put a driveway onto a township road, you've got to get the permission of the township road. If it's a state highway, you got to get the permission of the state highway. There are all kinds of little other things that have to be checked off before we allow that thing to be constructed, right?
Yes, and I also will add that we have had, in my tenure here, several CAFOs that have requested 950 animal units, or 999. So they are, you know, try to skirt not having to get the permit from DENR. And the Planning Commission has added that as a condition. At 950, the Planning Commission can be more restrictive on those conditions. And we have added that in the past that says you have to get the state permit as well at 950. So we can make that as a condition, and we have in the past.
Other questions for Scott or Kevin? Is there any other comments from an opponent or proponent?
Yeah, Pete Sonstegard, Sioux Falls again. With the state general permit, there is soil borings required. So they are testing wherever you're putting manure management sheds or lagoons of any of that nature. Also, the state of South Dakota has some of the most difficult, stringent requirements for CAFOs in the 5-state area. And we also have some of the most restrictive setbacks in the 5-state area currently. Just want to bring a couple of those points up to you. And with manure application and incorporation that is regulated by the state, I have a friend that's got a dairy and small producer under 1,000 animal units, and he was in a violation, and he was called in, and the state called him within 24 hours to talk about the problem, and he called me to ask for help as to how to take care of the problem. So the state does get to producers sooner than 2 weeks. They might not show up, but they do at least contact the farm because they do have a list of all the different CAFOs in the community.
Any other comments, proponents or opponents?
Sir, Phil Taw again. A question for Scott. The state DNR plan uses animals versus animal units. Are you? Because I think there's a conflict in terms of what they consider that CAFO at 2,400 for, because a lot of the CAFO for like swine are trying to go for 2,400 because it's not 2,500, but those are the number of pigs at any one time in that finishing barn, not like a farrowing or piglets that are animal units and they have 2,400, but the only count is 0.1. So they have 2,400 little piglets, but the only count is 240. So I think you need to be aware when some of those things come in. And I get that the state requires for the larger ones water testing and soil bores. I like the DNR plan. It's just not enforceable. Of those 10 I mentioned, 9 of them are in Pierre, 1 of them's in Watertown. That's why they don't go anywhere. The first president that I got to serve under the United States Air Force said, trust but verify. I trust my local farmers, but they're self-reporting. They can self-bore. Most of them get a company to do it. I get that. But trust but verify. We need to work on that enforcement side of those issues. And whether they go here first or the state first, it's county by county. Are you guys leading the way? I certainly hope you want to. So let's show the state how to do this.
Other comments or cool. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Luter. I'm at 203 Elm Road in Hartford, and I'm not a public speaker, so excuse me.
Would you also
when I mess
put
up,
your microphone down,
Does that
please?
help?
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not here as a proponent or an opponent, as more food for thought after looking through this. I just moved up from Turner County. My experience looking through the ordinance is comes from that. And food for thought, I guess, when I look at the map and the CAFO Class A is almost all green. We can't cite a Class A CAFO hardly anywhere in Minnehaha County. Mr. Sonstegard said it himself. He wouldn't try to move here. But if he agrees to plant trees, it's half that. It's like the Class B map. It's not the Class A map. Here's where the other side of my food for thought, looking at that, but is also this. Class A is 2,000 plus animal units. My experience, because of being in Turner County, is mostly chickens. But if you look at animal units, you can put 6,000 cattle and 2,000 cattle. That's all considered Class A, but it's a big difference in animal units. 6 million chickens can go on the same site as 167,000 chickens, because that's all Class A. So my concern is, why do we stop at 2,000? Could there be a Class AA, where we look at those big guys that are talking 6 million chickens versus 167,000? Right now, they have the exact same setbacks. That is a concern, or a food for thought for you, if you will. The other thing, food for thought, are the waivers and the fact that planting trees eliminates needing a waiver. And that is just crazy to me, that somebody who lives there, has homesteaded there, has their home there, their family there, whatever, just because the CAFO plans to plant trees, if you don't agree to sign that waiver, it's, you know, if you're outside the half, the 50%, you're SOL. I mean, you can still come in, I guess, and speak. If you're within a half mile, you know about it, but that's a concern, I guess. So there's some food for thought for you. Looking at the map, I'm thinking, boy, it's all green. We couldn't do a Class A, but really, if I agree to plant trees, I have some space. And that could be as many as 6 million chickens. Not to pick on the chicken farmers, but it's where my experience comes from. Thank you.
Any other opponents or proponents?
Steve Schulten, 47628 249th Street in Del Rapids. I guess this is more of a food for thought deal. You hear a lot about traditional farms and everything else. Is a traditional family still the same family unit as it used to be with your mom and dad and 10 kids? You know, traditions change. That's the point, that you have to change with the times also to survive. I'm not a big farmer by any stretch of the imagination. As far as the 20,000 residents in the rural areas, how many of those are actual farmers also? So it's not all city people moving out there. And when they moved out there, was it not freedom to farm? I thought they had to have that on there for new buildings. I bought a farm in 1998, about the last time you guys addressed this. And at that time, it's like 250 units, I'll never get that big. I'll never have that many, you know. 20 years later, it's kind of like, well, yeah, here's that big now. So now this kind of all affects me where it never has in the past. I raise dairy bull calves to slaughter. So one of my points would be like the gentleman earlier said, was that 90-pound calf is treated the same as a 1,000-pound steer for waste management. And how come hogs are split up so much more, but then beef is not, or whatever, for as far as raising baby milk replacer, on-milk replacer, and everything else. There's a big difference in them, so I would like, there would be something to clarify or something, I don't know. And I'm not a public speaker either, so.
You did fine.
All right.
Any other questions or comments for Steve? Last call.
Doug Odie, Brandon, South Dakota. I'm the one that has been brought up, our name has anyway. I'd just like to say that we've heard 20,000 residents out in the rural area. Don't they all have septic tanks? Are they being monitored? No. Around our dairy, we have 4 monitoring wells that are checked yearly. the results have been all very favorable. We live out there. We don't like having a bad name for our neighbors. It concerns us when we have to haul. We haul in the fall of the year and a little bit in the spring, and then the spring is definitely all knifed in the ground. In the fall, we take our silage off. We have a very short window of time. We have to get that emptied and applied. This past year, yes, it concerned us. We did have a smell. It was hot. The humidity was very high. Strong south winds. Yes, and then we had a rain shower. We could not be out there immediately afterwards incorporating that in. In fact, when I got the call, it was a Sunday. I was out there. It was still a little bit too sticky for me to be out there incorporating, but it was our job to do that. So when people say we aren't incorporating it, that kind of ticks me off a little bit. But I just want to open up and clear the air on this. But we want to be a good neighbor to everybody in our township. So I just wanted to make that clear to you.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate your comment.
Chairman, I just would comment that when that happened, I and my wife actually and I both went out there, visited with Doug's neighbor who's got like a zillion chickens of 28 different breeds, and I tried to find your house, Matt, but I wasn't sure. And the bullet holes were there when I got there. It wasn't me. But anyway, I try to be responsive as a county commissioner, and I'm not afraid to get mud or other things on my boots, and nothing is perfect. It was a special situation there with the rain, and the humidity definitely does affect the way odor stays here or there. And anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other opponents or proponents?
Jared Quested from Baltic, South Dakota there. I hate to draw this out any longer, but just for some of us young guys sitting back here, not sure what to say, I guess, but, you know, I'm progressively trying to grow and do more and more on our farm, and we feed cattle there. And farms aren't the same as they used to be. And you talk about this industrial farming. Well, us feeding a bunch of cattle doesn't make us a big industry. You know, we're just trying to make a living, and it's not killing us from the smells or anything. Yeah, it's not favorable all the time, but the particulates in the air, whatever. I've been around big dairy my whole life and farms. I'm still living. I'm not dead yet. You know, it's not killing me. So some of these points bother me a lot, and I understand that it's not easy to be in the smell all the time, and I'm used to it because I'm always there. But I plan to grow, and I plan to be in front of you guys as soon as I can to do more on our own farm, you know, and become a CAFO and all that. So just I think it's good what Kevin and Scott have put together here, and I like all the details they went into to really show how it affects not only us as farmers, but also the rural residents. So I guess I'm a proponent, and I wanted to speak for the young people here, make sure that they had a voice. So thanks.
Jared, could you give us your address too,
Yes.
please, besides Baltic?
The address is 251, we just moved, 25176 471st Avenue.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments? Last call for the second time. Last call. With that, I don't see anybody moving. Bring this back to the county commission for their discussions and action.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'm really happy with the discussion we've had here today. I think that we've had a civil discussion with virtually every viewpoint expressed, and that's exactly what we hope for. We're not operating under the pressure of a $100 million project that wants to build a rendering plant next to your house. Agriculture is an industry, and areas zoned ag, it's an industrial area. It's not a park. It's not a hobby. The fact is, 150 years ago, dirt farmers were getting shot by ranchers who wanted to prevent barbed wire from cutting the range in half. It was an adoption of a new technology. You know, Grandpa would have said, they didn't have barbed wire in my day. Well, guess what? We got barbed wire. Now we take it for granted. In 1900, 40% of our population was involved in agriculture. Today it's 2%. 2% of the people grow 100% of our food. And as Walt Bone said, we're losing 17 million acres a year. Are we going to grow more food on less land? Are we going to have fewer people going forward in the future? I don't think so. Nobody wants to have CAFOs. But that's the way that technology is going. That's the way the law is going. I know that it's not comfortable for everyone, but I think that we have to accept that that's going to continue. I think that restricting it near the cities is something we will do as these conditional uses come forward. I don't believe the Planning Commission will be sending them on to the full commission without substantial changes. As far as enforcement, I absolutely think we need to make sure that if the state isn't doing their part, and the state seems to be dropping the ball on so many things these days, that we do our part. I remember once there was an issue with bad meat from a meatpacking plant, and the federal government said, well, we'll increase our inspections. And they hired more meat supervisors in Denver, but that didn't add anything to the Morels plant in Sioux Falls or IBP. We need to make sure that we have boots on the ground doing that kind of thing. And meeting with the neighbors, we just had a plan development come before the Planning Commission where the guy and his brothers invited all the neighbors to like a pizza party to talk about things. Not one showed, but the room was this full of opponents when we came to deciding where we're going to go with this plan. You know, people have to be willing to speak on both sides, and I think a lot of farmers are kind of shy about talking to each other. We've had it on drainage issues where cousins sat in the back of the room like this on the opposite side of the issue. I mean, heck, they're cousins. This is not the perfect ordinance, but I believe that this is a step in the right direction, and we can make additional modifications to it in the future. And again, we're not functioning under a deadline or with a gun to the side of our head. This is, we can do this today if we choose.
Commissioner Heiberger.
No, I'll probably forget everything I was going to say. Thank you,
Good.
Jeff. Yeah, that'd be a first one. That, you know, CAFOs, I think, have gotten a bad name, and maybe that's a good reason. I mean, it didn't used to be called CAFOs; they were called farms, and they were family farms. And right now, I think most of the ones that we're dealing with in Minnehaha County are just family farms. I mean, I don't know of any outside industry that's come into Minnehaha County, and I could be wrong, and built a huge unit. The ones that I'm aware of are all either my generation, or they're an older than I am, or they're young people like Jared and his friends that are just trying to continue with that family farm. And as the land shrinks because we're selling off of our little acreages, off of our farmland, we don't really have a place to go. And it's better to have your cows or your pigs in a building than out in a wallow in the back where they really stink. I think the Planning Commission has done a really good, or the Planning Committee, they've done a really good job of going back through. We're not really changing, well, we are changing them some, but we're updating our ordinances. It's not like we came with this whole new plan to throw out there. I hope that everyone in here that spoke has actually read it. I mean, I didn't really know what I was getting into when we talked about, well, we're going to have some updates, until I sat down and I read everything. And I've been through some of it more than one time. And we have done some reductions in setbacks, but those reductions were done by scientific and evidence that we're getting from outside. I think they've spent 8 months of working really hard on this. It is good that we had all this public input, because that's part of the process. We'd like to see public input from the beginning. I know we struggle with our budget process. Nobody comes. We put it out there on a regular basis, and nobody ever comes and says anything, which maybe is good. We don't have to deal with it. But I mean, this has been really good. It's been really long. I am supportive of what they've done. I think they've done a good job, and Jeff's right. If there are changes that need to come in the future, we will look at those. But there also is there is still the opportunity at each step of the way to come and talk to us and say, these are some problems and we want these addressed.
Thank you. Anyone else like to make any comments? Commissioner Karski?
Comment and a question. Thank you, Commissioner Heiberger. You know, family farm may not be big business, but you can't help it. It's big money these days, and thank you to these young men in the back and so many people that are getting into agriculture. SDSU and the programs up there and the amount of education and the science and that goes into farming and agriculture these days and what it takes to run a good, clean operation. I can't look at this without thinking, I'd rather have one CAFO with 500 cattle than 20 people grazing 50 cattle along, or 49 cattle along a river, and what happens to the water quality there. I mean, just with what we can do with science and the investment that it takes, and you need to have a return on that investment. My question is, what's within our ordinance to prevent anybody from working around it, saying, well, I have two Class Cs and they're right next to each other, instead of making it a Class B? How do we know that that can't happen?
Kevin Hookman again, County Planning Department. That has been addressed in this ordinance, so if an individual wants to place two Class C, they can go through our process at two Class Cs. However, as a Class C, we will require them through our ordinance now to get a state permit because they're trying to skirt that permitting process based on the two Class Cs. I can't recall the distance right now off the top of my head, but we do have a setback distance where if they are too close to each other, then they're one unit. So that is addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I mean, I am very thankful for all the work that the Planning Committee did, but I'm also very thankful for the folks that came today and provided information and perspective against this, or with suggestions for some of these ordinances. And frankly, I mean, I grew up in Yankton. We had smells in Yankton when I was growing up. I mean, it was just part of living there. It never really I never really questioned it. And I do live out in a rural area. I live in Split Rock Township, and so I'm not likely to have a CAFO move in right next door to me because it's a fairly populated area. I do think that some of the issues that were brought up today maybe are issues that we could look at and think about a little bit more. I think there might be an opportunity to put in an absolute limit close to a growing city. I think that that's something that we could certainly look at, because I don't think the likelihood is that we would approve that anyway, and it would give some assurances to folks who are investing in that area. I am a little concerned that there is no waste management plan requirement for CAFOs under 1,000. I think that, that still is a lot of animals, and I think that there are concerns about the level of expertise that we can afford to have in our department, but I think that that's something that I would like to see maybe considered a little bit further, what options we might have there, because I do think that might be a bit of a gap where we are right now. Otherwise, I think that generally it's based on a lot of science. I've had an opportunity to be out at several CAFOs now. I'm not like Cindy that I don't live right next to several of them, but I've been amazed at the technology and the science and the lack of odor, and been at picnics in the midst of a CAFO and just really been amazed. It's been really one of the things that I've learned the most, frankly, about since I've been on the commission. But there were some tweaks to these that I'd like to see maybe before we approve them, or at least have considered further based on this information today.
Other comments? Is there action that anyone would like to bring? Commissioner Heiberger?
I would like to see us move forward with this, but that to make a list of the concerns that Commissioner Bender has and to have the staff work on those and bring those back for further discussion. It should probably go through the planning committee, some of those things, and bring them back with recommendations where we're going. But I think that overall we've done a really good job on this. There is a big section on waste management for smaller units in here. And I guess we can look and see if there needs to be tweaking done on that. I guess Kevin's got a comment. I'm not sure if I'm at the same place you are because I'm not really sure where we're at differently.
Sure. I will comment that we will still require a manure management, which is a little different based on that the state requires nutrient management because they're going to be really looking into how much, say, nitrogen is applied on a field based on the nutrient needs of the plants, where that's something that our office isn't going to do very well. But we will be able to, say, look at are they using liquid manure or are they using dry manure? Where are they going to be placing that manure between holding it in like a waste management location that needs to be engineered as part of our ordinance to state standards, and then it's applied to our ordinance based on the setback requirements and it's just that we're not going to go through and ask about the rate of application like the state may. That would be the big difference.
Commissioner Kursky?
So, excuse me. I want to have a Class C or D CAFO. Part of the application process, the manure is addressed in that process?
Manure as a management is addressed, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. It's just not the nutrient side
It's
of it,
not the
but the
nutrients.
management of
Yep.
the manure is addressed.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Back to
Kim,
the,
what section is that in?
Let's see.
It's
So-
right under table 3. Just
That
before
would be
12:16.
Section G, manure application requirements, and that's going to be applicable for all sizes of CAFOs. And that's for the manure application side of things. That includes setbacks from like lakes and rivers and wells and residences. Then we have in the section E, I believe, section E3, there's a requirement for construction document for manure containment facilities. Any newly constructed manure containment facility must conform to South Dakota Department of Environment and Natural Resources design standards. A registered professional engineer shall certify the plan specifications and inspect the construction of the facility. A copy of the certified plans must be provided to the planning department. So it is addressed, it's just, yeah.
And that applies to any size CAFO?
And that would apply to any size CAFO.
any other questions? Any other comments?
I make
Is
a
there
motion
a-
to approve.
I'll second that motion. I would ask that we plan to send this back to the planning department and planning committee to look at some of the concerns.
Is that an amendment to the,
We can make an amendment to amendment, or do you want to just do it clean?
well, I want to clarify with Commissioner Kursky of
I'm
what he was
making
approving.
a motion to approve the ordinance as it is submitted. I guess what proper procedure would be to get a second and then to amend it.
Okay, I will second that.
Okay. Is there any other conversations or amendments to the original motion of approving the changes in the
Mr. Chairman, not an amendment, but I think that it's, should be understood that we in the planning will take these things back and review them additionally.
I'd be happy with that.
Okay.
Just as a point of clarification, specifically to review whether it makes sense to have a limitation around CAFOs around a municipality or city. and-
Absolutely, and enforcement and all the other items that have been brought forward. I think that they should all be, and we've obviously heard a lot of good input here today, and we should take that into consideration. And the staff will review it, and I plan to, certainly, most of the planning commission is here. They will also be discussing it. Maybe I'll be off this committee next year.
We have a motion and a second to approve the zoning ordinance amendments, correct?
Roll call, Mr. Chair.
And we will do a roll call vote. The one other thing that I didn't hear mentioned that I would like to be adding to the conversation, if you will, is the whole issue of trying to look for a different or better or improved way of notification of public entities. I don't know how we do that without sending out emails or registered letters or whatever, but to the best of our knowledge and performance, we can try to make that work better and not be happy with currently the status quo.
Question?
Commissioner Karski?
I'm unfortunately unclear as to, are we voting on the ordinance as it is? Is there an amendment that's being proposed? Okay.
All the changes that we just went through that are all the underlying stuff has been put into the new ordinance.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
what it is.
Thank you.
That is an amendment? It's not.
That's the ordinance we're
Ordinance
voting
we're
on.
voting on.
Correct, but
Okay.
you were the original vote on this, so I want to make sure that you're comfortable with what we're doing, and that is to approve all of the proposed zoning ordinance amendments to the current ordinance,
Correct.
MC 16-150-17, correct? And Commissioner Heiberger, you're seconding that. Any other questions or comments?
Not to beat the issue to death, but so we're approving the ordinance as it was presented today, and then providing direction to the planning and zoning to consider all the comments that were made today and come back with any proposed addressing those issues.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd ask for a second opinion, but I really don't want another legal opinion. Any other comments or questions before we call for the roll call? Thank you. You want to go ahead and call the roll call, Olivia?
Barth,
Aye.
Bender,
Aye.
Benega,
Aye.
Karski,
Aye.
Heiberger.
Aye.
Motion unanimously passes 5-0. I would like to thank everybody that came today. I do appreciate the conversations, and not everybody agreed. And Matt, you can give me a call about that whole issue of politics and money and how that affects my vote.
Yeah.
We'll have that conversation privately. Well, thank you. I do really appreciate all the input, because we do get lots of input, and frankly, a lot of that time it comes from people with a special interest, but you guys and ladies did an excellent job of presenting yourselves, so thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of that.
And when you leave, go to the Sioux Empire Fair.
Good point.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff.
Item number 12, to authorize the chair to sign amendments to joint security protection agreement between the State of South Dakota Department of Military and Minnehaha County to decrease initial contract amount. Keith Winiak, thank you for your patience.
Not a problem, not a problem. Keith Winina, the Air Guard Division Supervisor. Good morning. We are requesting the approval of the commission to sign the amendment to the Joint Security Protection Agreement. The agreement decreases the funding of the agreement $608.43 to cover the cost of the state audit. This is something new. The way that they start, they're going to bill and take money for these audits. Kind of sounds silly, but they're taking the $608 away from the contract original amount, but then the Air National Guard in turn is requesting $608 back from the government, the federal government, to supplement that. So it shouldn't change our operational costs for the year, FY 17 or nothing like that. So it's just something that has to be done, and we'll see it again here in a year or two. So
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the new amendment. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. Thank you again for your patience. Item 13 is to consider a motion to approve a resolution supporting the submission of the 2017 County Achievement Award application for information technology. Monty. Left.
Good
Oh, no, he
morning,
didn't.
commissioners. Afternoon. Good afternoon,
Good
commissioners.
afternoon.
I think that may be the first
This is
time
a
I've said
record,
that.
isn't it?
I think we've lost the whole audience. It's just me and you guys. This
Not
one's.
that you're not important. Not that this isn't great.
I need to do a little more work on where I'm scheduled here.
I agree.
But anyways, so Carol emailed me a few weeks back and asked if she thought that I had something that we could put together for this application for the County Achievement Award, and I thought about it a little bit and took some time to write that up, and it was a great opportunity to reflect on the whole project from the beginning to the end and how that all played out. And I tell you, it wasn't all that obvious at the beginning how this was going to all play out. So it was a great opportunity, like I said, to look at that and reflect. I remember sitting in Gerald's office several years ago with a dilemma of the options that we've been looking at are horrible. What are we going to do? And long story short, I appreciate your guys' support as we've gone through those and trusting me. And it's like I said, great to go back and reflect and look at that. I'm confident that we have a very good solution that all of those use. I sent an email to Tracy and Aaron yesterday to let them know that I was doing this and sent them the write-up. And if you just read the short one, make sure you read the 5-page one. It won't take that long. There's a lot of pictures in there. And Tracy said, just here recently she had a court case, very large court case, and what she would normally bring binders and binders worth of documents and emails and whatnot, she said, I went with a very small file and my tablet, knowing that I could get to my email and police reports and all of that stuff. So great success story that she sent my way as well. So with that being said, I'm looking for your support to submit the application.
Well,
You have my support.
ironically, I could remember that conversation in my office. Usually when people come to my office, they don't want to be there in the first place. But anyway, more importantly, your leadership and your staff and all the people in the departments have gotten behind this project, which is a substantial change in the way we do business. But more importantly, it becomes more efficient for us as a organization, and without your leadership, it would not have happened. So I think most of us are more than excited that you would submit that application, because you deserve it whether you get it or not, and I can't believe you won't. So with
the
that,
only motion I'd like to make with a standing ovation, maybe.
yeah. Is there a
I'll
second?
second that with a standing ovation. It is amazing.
All those in favor of the motion, and you can stand if you want, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. We will stand.
You have so much money.
I think we needed to stand up.
Really need to run down the
Your
hall.
timing was good for that too, Monty. Thank you for all your work, and I do really mean that. Authorize the chair on item number 14 to sign a request for proposal 1056 for crisis service grant program to submit the South Dakota Department of Social Services, the Division of Public or Behavioral Health. There's public health too.
Yeah.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Erin Sersky of Minnehaha County Commission Office. I'm here to ask for approval for permission and approval for the chair to sign and then submit an RFP. Part of the House Bill 1183, which passed, a piece of it was to have a grant program to assist local jurisdictions to implement crisis response care for individuals with mental and behavioral health. So what we're proposing in this RFP is to use this funding to kind of take on and pay for the planning of a phase 2 of our community triage planning project that we already have in motion. It will be able to leverage and bring the project through for a full year. So in that is evaluation for this grant from the Augustana Research Institute, proposed to have Sage Consulting continue with the facilitation report writing. And then actually, I just handed out an amended budget. We were going to have a summit. It was going to be outside of Sioux Falls. Now we're going to host it in Sioux Falls because then we're able to double the number of attendees we can have. And we're going to partner with the Augustana Research Institute to co-host that to make the money go further. The narrative is still it's being finalized. I'm working on that with Augustana Research Institute. We're going to get that finalized tomorrow and everything put together. But the narrative would just go over the work we've already done with the Community Triage Center planning, discuss more the budget, and then we would mail that up to peer for submission.
Thank you, Aaron. Does anyone have any questions for Aaron at this point? You deserve an achievement award also for your behavioral and mental health related issues. You have taken that on
Not
as
for
a
your
project.
own issues.
Not yours. Maybe for ours. But you have taken that on, and we appreciate your leadership with that also.
Yes.
You've been awesome.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the crisis service grant. Those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion unanimously passes. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for your patience.
Yes, thank you.
Item 15 are commissioner liaison reports.
What's going on here?
Pointing to
Oh, I'm
somebody.
doing this. To this.
Commissioner Heiberger.
I just have one just to remind you that I'm going to Chamberlain tomorrow and Thursday for South Dakota Association of County Commissioners Board of Directors meeting, and I will be discussing those resolutions. There were a couple that came from Pennington County, and that were the only ones that I saw in our packet. I haven't read the packet yet. That's yet to do today. That were submitted by Pennington County, and then ours. I have yet to reach out to Lincoln County to see if they approved those same resolutions that we approved. That we're supposed to do those today. I haven't, obviously, don't know if they did. And then also the City of Sioux Falls will hopefully be approving the same packet that we approved, so have some teeth behind what we did here. And then also just to remind you all to go to the fair, and I think everybody's actually scheduled for a tour at some point or not. I was out last night. The crowds were tremendous. I mean, crazy. In fact, I wasn't on the interstate at the time, but I was told that the interstate was backed up to try to get into the fairgrounds for quite some time, to the point that their lead singer was not able to even get there on time, and his concert started a little later than anticipated because he was stuck on the interstate trying to get to the grandstand. So all went very well. I worked security last night for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 hours, and I didn't see any issues when I was walking around. Everybody was very well behaved. It was very nice. I found a couple of lost children, but other than that, it was very nice to them. Other than that, it was really good time. It was a lot of fun. In fact, I really enjoyed going. I missed the concert, but I enjoyed the security part and just being out there with people. So it was good.
Good for you. Any other liaison reports? Any new business? Any old business? We need to go into executive session for personnel contracts and litigation, so I'm looking for a motion.
That's my motion.
I second it.
We have a motion and a second to go into exec session for personnel contracts and litigation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
5
Motion
minutes.
unanimously passes. I need about